The wind howled across the battlements of Winterfell as dusk settled into true night, a swirl of snow drifting down from the dark sky. Torches guttered, their light flickering along the ancient stone walls that had stood for thousands of years. Winterfell's courtyard looked almost deserted, though the watchmen on the walls kept their silent vigil. It was cold enough to freeze breath in the air, and in that hush of the north, even the ravens quieted. The old god's weirwood in the gods wood beckoned with the gentle rustling of its red and white leaves, an ageless witness to the swirl of destiny about to unfold. For centuries, House Stark had ruled the north from these halls, its people bound by loyalty and tradition, bound by a shared identity in the face of the realm's harshest winters. Yet tonight, the seeds of rebellion stirred in a young man's heart, an unacknowledged son, a bastard who had grown up among the noble children but always remained apart. It was that sense of apartness, that sense of quiet desperation and repressed anger, that now coalesced into an audacious thought. Jon Snow was about to challenge the Iron Throne's hold over the north. He did not come to this thought easily. The path to this night was paved with every slight, every moment of being relegated to the side as Robb, legitimate heir to Winterfell, basked in Ned Stark's open regard. It was shaped by the soft words of comfort from his sisters. Well, Sansa less so, for she rarely looked Jon in the eye, but Arya's warm acceptance was an anchor he cherished. And it was shaped, too, by the simmering question of his mother's identity, never addressed, always lingering. Eddard Stark, though loving in his quiet, stern way, offered only so much in terms of fatherly affection. There was a line that Jon could never cross. He could never be named a Stark. Perhaps that was why, in his deeper insecurities, he saw no future except perhaps serving the Night's Watch. He knew that was what men in his position often did, exchange a stifled half-life for one of duty on the wall. But something changed when King Robert Baratheon came to Winterfell, accompanied by the Lannisters and all the noise and splendor of the southern court. Robert's roaring laughter, the sly looks from Queen Cersei, the hush that followed Jaime Lannister's measured steps. These all spoke of a power that was not of the north. Jon felt the imbalance keenly as he realized how the presence of a king from the south made men shift allegiances with just a single command. He felt for the first time that the quiet dignity of the north might be swallowed by the hungry lion of House Lannister, by the boisterous stags, by forces far from these snows. And he began to wonder if the ties that bound the north to the Iron Throne might not be so unbreakable after all. The first words of revolt stirred in Jon's mind during one cold morning in the practice yard. He was sparring with Robb, Theon Greyjoy bantering at the edges. The old master-at-arms, a tall man with a thick mustache and a booming voice, was calling out orders. Jon's sword connected with Robb's in a loud crack, and Robb's eyes met his with that mixture of brotherly affection and competition that had always defined them. Jon recognized in that moment that Robb carried the name Stark effortlessly, whereas he would forever be Snow. The court from King's Landing would never value him the way they valued the rightful heir to Winterfell. And should the day come that the North had to stand on its own, no Southern king would look to Jon for counsel. He would be an afterthought, just as he always had been. For a bastard whose entire existence was overshadowed by the question of worth, the realization served as an agonizing spark, or perhaps an awakening. The impetus for rebellion didn't come fully formed, it arrived in small increments. An overheard conversation between Robert and Ned in the Solar, with Robert complaining about the cost of entertaining the North's pride. A dismissive wave of the king's hand when the matter of the Night's Watch's dwindling numbers was broached. An encounter with Queen Cersei in the corridor, where she had given Jon a lingering glance that felt more like an inspection of livestock than a greeting to a fellow human. These were the quiet humiliations that festered in Jon's spirit. Then came the moment in the courtyard, late at night, when Jon stumbled upon Robert Baratheon, half-drunk, roaring to some Lannister men about how the North always required appeasement, how they thought themselves high and mighty on their frozen rock. He spoke of Nords as if they were an unruly pack of dogs that simply needed the discipline of a southern master. Jon crouched in the shadows, fists clenched, some part of him telling him not to act rashly. Still, he could not forget the smug, condescending tone in the king's voice, the laughter of the gold and crimson retinue. In that moment, a line was drawn in Jon's mind. Here was a king who saw them as lesser despite their essential part in Robert's rebellion, despite all the Starks had sacrificed to keep the realm safe from the hazards beyond the wall. If Robert had so little respect for Ned Stark, the man who had risked so much for him, then what hope did a bastard have of ever receiving any measure of that respect? The North was nothing but a means to an end, a resource. And if that was the sum of it, perhaps it was time the North reconsidered its fealty. But could Jon truly challenge a king? The notion seemed absurd at first. He was a bastard, after all. Even if he rallied the small folk, even if he convinced men loyal to Ned, what hope did he have against the resources of the crown? A coup in the North would be a death sentence without strong allies. And so Jon tried to push the thought from his mind to concentrate on the tasks at hand. He thought perhaps if he joined the Night's Watch soon, he could remove himself from the swirling politics that enveloped Winterfell while King Robert was there. But fate had a way of conspiring to keep him there a little longer. Jon and Arya were to join the feast that evening, at Ned's insistence. As they made their way through the great hall, the heat from the roaring fires clashing against the cold that seeped through the stone, Jon tried to school his features. He did not want to betray his anger, nor his confusion, but the sight of King Robert in his gilded seat at the dais, a thick turkey leg in one hand, a flagon of wine in the other, was almost too much. Robert's eyes roved across the hall, gliding over Jon and Arya as if they were inconsequential. "Father insisted we attend, so let's try to look grateful," Arya whispered through the corner of her mouth, a small grin ghosting her lips. Jon nodded, forcing a polite smile. He saw Ned Stark at Robert's side, wearing a face carved from stone, but he also knew Ned's disappointment at the king's casual disregard for the North. The feast was lavish, the music lively, but there was tension in the air. The Lannisters seemed coiled, watchful, while the Starks who sat at the high table with them tried to keep the conversation polite. The feast ended without incident, but the feeling that something essential had broken between Ned and Robert remained. Jon sensed it in the stoic lines of his Lord Father's face, in the tightness of his jaw, and in Catelyn Stark's forced composure. That night, once the guests had retreated to their chambers or the alehouses, Jon walked alone in the courtyard, a swirl of snow catching the torchlight. He inhaled the freezing air, pressing a gloved hand to the stone for balance. Tomorrow might bring more indignities. If he did nothing, it would never end. The first person he spoke to about his doubts was, surprisingly, Maester Luwin. The Maester found Jon in the library, leafing through old histories of the North. Jon was fixated on the tales of Brandon the Builder and Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. Torrhen had knelt to Aegon the Conqueror, yielding the North to spare his people the fires of the dragons. A wise choice, so the histories said. The North's blood was spared, and a measure of independence preserved. But Jon wondered if that caution had cost them the true sovereignty of the North for centuries afterward. Maester Luwin approached quietly, his chain rustling softly around his neck. He asked Jon if something weighed on his mind. The Maester was a gentle presence in Winterfell, learned in so many ways, and he sensed the boy's turmoil. Jon hesitated before speaking. What was he to say? That he dreamed of severing the North from the Iron Throne? That he had started to imagine himself leading a revolt? "I've been thinking," Jon began carefully, "about the old kings of Winter, about what it must have been like to rule the North as a free kingdom." Luwin nodded gravely. They were different times, and the world has changed much since then. But should it have changed so much? The king. He speaks as though the North is but another province to tax and govern. Should we not stand on our own as we once did? Luwin's gray eyes flickered with concern. You are not the only one who has asked such questions, Jon Snow. But your father is a Lord Paramount who swore fealty to the Iron Throne. That bond is sealed in blood and honor. You must tread carefully when you wonder about undoing centuries of allegiance. Jon nodded but did not relinquish the thought. If a king no longer respects us, is the oath still so binding? Torrhen Stark knelt to dragons. Does Robert Baratheon hold the same power? Do men of the North owe him the same obedience? The Maester pressed his lips together. The dragons are gone, but the realm stands on the precedent of those old vows. To question them now would invite difficulties. Difficulties, Jon repeated softly. It was an understatement. If House Stark rebelled, war would descend upon the North. The cost would be terrible. But sometimes a cause demanded such a price. Jon left the library that evening with the Maester's caution weighing on him. But the conversation did nothing to quell the storm in his heart. It only confirmed that the question gnawing at him was not one answered easily. He took to walking the castle late at night. The silence of Winterfell's corridors offered him an eerie solace. He would pass by the crypts occasionally, linger near the statue of Lyanna Stark, or wonder about his own mother in quiet agony. Ned Stark's secrets weighed heavily upon the entire family, though none bore that weight more than Jon. Sometimes he half believed the rumors that he was the child of some fisherwoman or that his father had an affair with Ash-Aradane. None of it rang true, but he had to quell the longing for a truth that Ned would never share. Perhaps in his darkest moments, Jon thought that if he had a lineage worthy of the name Stark, he could stand proudly beside Robb and declare the North free. Yet bastardy dogged him still. It reminded him of his place, or what others thought his place should be. Then came the day Jon stumbled upon Ned and Robert in a heated argument behind closed doors. He was not meant to hear it. The voices drew him unintentionally. The door cracked open just enough. A wave of scorching anger emanated from Robert, followed by Ned's stoic refusal. Jon gathered the shape of it. The king wanted Ned to come to King's Landing, possibly to accept the position of Hand. Ned did not want to leave the North unprotected, especially with rumors of wildling activity beyond the wall and unsettling tidings from across the sea concerning Targaryen exiles. Robert bellowed, calling Ned ungrateful, reminding him that it was Robert's rebellion that had put the Baratheons on the throne but also secured the realm. He insisted that if Ned was truly his friend, he would come south. "Don't make me command you, Ned," the king growled, voice thick with wine and impatience. After a long pause, Jon heard Ned speak quietly but firmly, something about the North having its own dangers. He heard Robert's frustrated footfalls, saw the door swing open violently. Jon ducked out of sight just in time, pressing himself against the wall. Robert stormed away in a flurry of curses, leaving Ned behind looking older than Jon had ever seen him. Ned stepped out moments later, closed the door, and sighed. He noticed Jon then, peering around the corner. Their eyes met. An awkward silence settled between them. Did Ned suspect how much Jon had overheard? Possibly, but he said nothing of it. He only placed a hand on Jon's shoulder and said, "Walk with me." They descended a small flight of stairs into the courtyard, the hush of fresh snowfall muting their steps. Ned's words, at first, were about simpler matters: the feast, the hunts, small talk about the comings and goings of the king's men. It was only after a few minutes that he spoke quietly, in the measured tone that Jon recognized as careful paternal advice. "You are of the North, Jon, as much as Robb or Arya. In your veins runs the blood of House Stark. No matter what the law says of your birth, you are my son." Jon felt a warm surge in his chest but tempered it, waiting for Ned's next words. "But these are dangerous times. Robert grows restless, and the Lannisters are watchful. I would urge you to be cautious, especially if you harbor any discontent. The realm is built on alliances, and House Stark cannot stand alone." Jon looked up at him. "But father," he said carefully, "if the king is at odds with us, what good is continuing the pretense of friendship?" Ned's gaze was as cold and unyielding as the winter sky. "Because the cost of open defiance is too high. If the North bleeds, it won't just be those who choose to fight. It will be our small folk, our villages, our old and our young. War leaves scars we cannot easily heal." Jon nodded, but in his heart, he felt a stirring that told him the king would bring about war anyway, if it suited him. And if the North was going to be forced into subservience or systematically broken down, was it not better to meet that threat head-on? He remembered the old wolf tales. Corner a wolf, and it would fight back with all the ferocity in its bones. That night, lying in his small room, Jon envisioned a North that bowed to no one. A North where he was not merely a footnote. He pictured drawing men from across the wide snows, the mountain clans, the northern houses, the bannermen who revered the Stark name but might rally to a cause that promised them true independence. The fantasy was enthralling, but the enormity of it crushed him. He was just a bastard, but sometimes bastards find power in corners. Sometimes what the legitimate heirs cannot do due to constraints of law or fear of dishonoring their house, a bastard can attempt. It began quietly, with Jon seeking out men in Winterfell's guard who harbored resentments toward the throne. Many of them had stories of disregard or cruelty at the hands of Southerners. Jon listened, empathized, stoked the fires of their wounded pride. Then there were the common folk in Wintertown, many of whom scraped by in lean years, often hearing that King's Landing's taxes or demands for grain left them with little. Jon would pass among them under cover of night, speaking softly of a day when the North might be free of all such burdens. He recognized that his name alone meant little, but the name Stark carried weight. Though he was a bastard, that hint of Stark blood in his veins granted him an audience he might not otherwise have had. Slowly, a network of the discontented began to form. He offered no firm promises, only the suggestion that things could be different. The unspoken question in each conversation: "If I strike, will you follow?" For a time, no one suspected his quiet recruitment. Robert was too busy hunting boars in the Wolfswood, guzzling wine by the cask, feasting to outdo himself. Cersei was embroiled in her own intrigues, perhaps trying to gauge if Ned truly would come to King's Landing. Ned himself was distracted by Robert's demands and by a letter from the Eyrie, something about Jon Arryn's concerns. The castle bustled with Lannister men, but they paid little attention to a bastard who seemed to keep mostly to himself. Jon used that anonymity to cultivate alliances. Even so, he was not entirely unobserved. Theon Greyjoy watched him carefully, noticing his late-night walks, the quiet looks he exchanged with certain guards. Theon, a ward of the Starks, was no stranger to captivity and subjugation. House Greyjoy had been humbled after Balon Greyjoy's rebellion. Perhaps Theon sensed a kinship in Jon's desire to break chains. In a surprising moment of candor, Theon approached Jon outside the stables one morning, where Jon was tending to Ghost, who had grown into a near-silent sentinel at Jon's side. "You scheme a lot these days, Snow," Theon said, leaning against the stable door, arms crossed. His tone was half jesting, half serious. "You wander about at odd hours. You talk to men you'd have previously ignored. Is something brewing in that bastard head of yours?" Jon paused, stroking Ghost's fur. "What if there were something? Would you tell Robb? Or Ned?" Theon flicked his gaze away momentarily. "You and I both live under the roof of a great man, but we're never truly part of it. Me, I'm a hostage from Pike, a reminder of my father's failed rebellion. You, a bastard, no mother in sight, no name but Snow." He shrugged, a cocky half-smile playing on his lips. "If something were brewing, I'd perhaps want to know if there's a place for me in it." Jon studied Theon's face, searching for deceit. Theon had a reckless spirit, but he also possessed a certain bitterness about his situation. Jon recognized the bitterness. It was the same brand that seared his own heart. "Perhaps there is," Jon said quietly. "But it's dangerous, and I won't force anyone to join." Theon grinned, a hungry light in his eyes. "Danger is half the fun," he said. "You'll find I'm not afraid of a bit of chaos. Tell me more." And so, that day, Jon shared a seed of his plan with Theon. He spoke of the possibility of confronting King Robert's authority, forging alliances among the other northern houses that might chafe under southern rule. Theon was surprisingly receptive, nodding in eager excitement. They spoke in hushed tones, the stable serving as a confessional for two souls who had always felt slightly out of place among the Starks. There was something exhilarating in saying the words out loud. The North could be free again. Jon felt the weight of them, the danger, but also the thrill. While Theon's involvement was an unexpected boon, Jon soon realized he could not proceed much further without risking his father's wrath if discovered. Ned Stark, honorable to a fault, would never sanction an outright rebellion unless absolutely forced. But Jon had glimpsed enough of Ned's internal conflict to suspect that if Robert pushed too far, Ned might not stand in Jon's way. In many ways, the coup Jon envisioned was not so much a direct betrayal of House Stark's values as it was a radical extension of them. The North was their first duty. And if a tyrant threatened the North, even if that tyrant was once Ned's friend, did House Stark not have an obligation to protect its people? The turning point came when Robert, drunk from celebrating some half-forgotten southern holiday, demanded a portion of the North's next harvest be sent south to help feed King's Landing's poor. It was framed as a request, but the tone was that of a command. Word spread quickly among the Winterfell staff. Men muttered that the harvest was not guaranteed, that the North's seasons were unforgiving, that feeding King's Landing might leave northern bellies empty in the face of an early winter. Robert, oblivious or uncaring, brushed aside their concerns with a dismissive wave. The sense of insult was palpable. After all, the southern lords rarely paid mind to the hardships of the north. Jon listened to these complaints carefully, noting which men bristled the most. Within days, he realized that a sizable portion of the guard was ready to support open defiance if it meant putting the north first. He began to move more boldly. He met with Robb in the Godwood one afternoon, requesting a private word. Robb came curious but slightly wary. The quiet hush of the weirwood's ancient boughs cloaked their conversation. Robb asked about Jon's troubled expression, and Jon wove his words carefully. He spoke of his concerns about Robert's behavior, about the possibility that the king could be a danger to the north. Robb listened but was constrained by the burden of his status. He was being groomed as Ned Stark's heir, after all. To speak of rebellion was treacherous. Yet Robb could not entirely mask a flicker of agreement when Jon spoke of Robert's disrespect. In that glimmer, Jon sensed that if events transpired in a certain way, Robb's loyalty to the north might override his sense of fealty to the Iron Throne. But Robb was not ready to join a conspiracy. He was Ned's trueborn son, bound too tightly by a sense of duty. "Be careful," he told Jon. "Father wouldn't want you stirring trouble, no matter the reason." Jon could not blame Robb for caution. He merely nodded and said, "I understand." But in his heart, the die was cast. The king would not remain in Winterfell forever. Jon believed that once Robert left, the chance to muster an uprising would diminish. They had to act while the king was present and unawares, seize the seat of power in the north, and declare independence before the crown could respond. A bold stroke, but bold strokes sometimes carve history in the north. The next 2 weeks were a fever of secret meetings. Jon, Theon, and a handful of guard officers met in the crypts beneath Winterfell by torchlight. They laid out a plan to seal the gates when the time came to send signals to allied houses. They would block the king's men from leaving. If Robert wanted to remain at Winterfell, he would be a hostage of sorts, an unwilling guest. The Lannisters traveling with him would be forced to bend or face immediate mortal peril. Then, with Robert effectively neutralized, they would send ravens to northern lords declaring that Robert Baratheon had threatened the north and that House Stark must preserve its autonomy. Perhaps some lords would balk, but many more would rally in defense of Ned Stark, especially if they believed the king had acted dishonorably. In the confusion, a new order might be forged. Jon envisioned Ned at the helm, reclaiming the title of king in the north. Perhaps there would be no place for a bastard in that scenario, but the dream of a free north was worth it. As the day of the coup approached, however, a single, terrifying question remained unanswered. What would Ned do if he discovered their plan? Jon wrestled with the moral quandary. Was he truly prepared to go against his father's direct wishes? Or would he, at the crucial moment, try to persuade Ned that it was the only path left? Ned had weathered the tension with Robert for weeks, but tensions were nearing a breaking point. One night, Robert slapped a serving girl on the rear end during a drunken stupor, and she fled in tears, bruised and humiliated. Jon saw the anger blazing in Ned's eyes. House Stark protected its own, and Robert's callousness was an affront. Robert apologized half-heartedly, but the damage was done. Rumors spread among the servants, fueling the sense that Robert viewed Winterfell's folk as his to command or abuse. Jon thought, if the king continues like this, Ned will have to choose the north over Robert. Finally, the day came. Jon had arranged a midnight gathering in the Great Hall, instructing his co-conspirators to bar the side doors once everyone was inside. It was to be a feast, a celebration ostensibly in honor of the king's successful hunt that afternoon. In truth, it was the perfect trap. The key figures of Robert's retinue would be in attendance, as well as many of Winterfell's men. Once the doors were locked, Jon and Theon would confront the king openly. If Robert refused to yield, well, they would have no choice but to take him prisoner. It was madness, pure madness, and Jon's stomach churned as the hour approached. But the hammer had been lifted. It was time to let it fall. When midnight neared, torches lit the hall, casting long, flickering shadows across the stone floors. Outside, the snow fell thicker than ever, muffling the world in a hush. The king arrived in good spirits, flushed from wine, with Cersei gliding at his side. Joffrey, sullen as always, followed close behind, while Jaime Lannister, in all his golden finery, escorted the queen. Other knights and nobles trailed behind. Ned Stark led them to the table, hosting them with the courtesy demanded of a lord. Robb, Sansa, and Arya were at the head table, though Arya looked less than pleased to be anywhere near Joffrey. Bran and Rickon were abed, too young for such late revels. Jon observed from near the hall's entrance, heart pounding so loudly he thought everyone must hear it. His co-conspirators, disguised among the crowd, prepared for his signal. Jon had told himself that if Ned or Robb asked him to stand down, he would. But if no such command came, then the plan would unfold. The feast began quietly enough, though the tension was palpable to those who knew what was afoot. Servants bustled, bringing roast venison, bread, ale, wine. The hum of conversation started low. Robert was soon laughing over some joke, bellowing at a Lannister soldier who sat across from him. Jaime smirked at the king's jokes but never let his guard down, those green eyes always scanning the room. Cersei looked bored, swirling her wine. Ned Stark tried to keep conversation polite, but he seemed drained, as if he had fought a losing battle already. Jon watched him, wondering if tonight he would see a side of Ned he had never witnessed. At last, Jon strode forward. He took a place near the dais, hands clasped behind his back, face schooled into a semblance of calm. Theon lurked behind him, and at a nod, a guard quietly slipped the bar across the heavy wooden doors. The music halted abruptly. Robert, turning in confusion, set down his cup with a thud. "What's this, boy?" he demanded, his thick brows drawing together in irritation. All eyes turned to Jon Snow. Jon's heart slammed in his chest, but he forced himself to speak. "Your Grace," he began, voice echoing in the sudden hush. "Pardon the interruption, but we, the people of the North, have endured many slights. We have honored our oaths to the crown, but that loyalty has not been reciprocated. We have seen how you hold our customs in contempt, how you demand from us without offering respect. We have witnessed the bruises and humiliations you inflict upon those you deem beneath you." He fought to keep his voice steady, though adrenaline surged within him. "This cannot stand." Robert's face darkened. "You dare speak to your king so, you bastard?" he roared, half rising from his seat. Jaime Lannister tensed, hand drifting toward his sword. Ned Stark looked stricken, uncertain whether this was some ill-advised outburst or a deeper plot. The flicker in his eyes told Jon that Ned had begun to suspect. Cersei rose as well, her expression contemptuous. "This is treason," she hissed. Jon nodded grimly. "Perhaps by the laws of your realm it is. But I say that this realm is not ours. The North bows to no one who does not respect us, who does not honor our freedoms." He caught Theon's eye, saw Theon give the signal. Around the hall, men of the Winterfell guard who had secretly allied with Jon stepped forward, hands on sword hilts. The watchers loyal to the king froze in shock. Ned Stark stood, his voice grave. "Jon, stop this madness." His gaze swept over the men brandishing swords. Robb stood, eyes wide, torn between dismay and a flicker of something that might have been awe. Arya, her face a mask of confusion, placed a hand on her own small blade but looked to her father for guidance. Jon met Ned's stern gaze. "Forgive me, my lord, but I cannot. You have taught me honor, and I believe the greatest honor we can do the North is to free it from those who would abuse us. King Robert has made a mockery of the friendship you once shared. I would not see you bend to his will any longer." Silence stretched. Jaime Lannister's knuckles whitened on his sword's pommel. Robert, outraged, grabbed a flagon of wine, flinging it aside. Wine splattered across the table. "You ungrateful whelp," he spat. "All of you, do you think you can stand against the might of the crown?" The king's men started to rise, but the ring of steel from the northern guards, who were already in advantageous positions, halted them. Theon stepped beside Jon. "We can and we will," Theon said boldly. "Yield, and no blood need be spilled." Cersei let out a laugh, brittle as ice. "Yield? To a bastard and a hostage? You must be mad." Ned lifted his hand, signaling for silence. The authority in his voice carried. "Enough." He turned to Jon, and for a long moment, father and son locked eyes. Jon expected an outburst of fury, but what he saw was sorrow. Then Ned said, voice trembling, "If it is to be done, it should not be done this way." Jon swallowed. "If there were another way, I would have chosen it. But the king's disregard is too plain. He endangers our people with his arrogance." He looked around at the many swords. "You have shown me kindness beyond what a bastard deserves, father. But I cannot stand by while the North is humiliated." Robert's roar of anger silenced them all again. He shoved the table aside, sending platters crashing. He reached for his warhammer, which stood propped against a pillar. "I'll show you humiliation," he spat. "You want to talk about slights? I'll see your heads mounted on spikes outside the Red Keep." Jaime Lannister took a step forward, but Ned blocked his path. Something in Ned's posture changed at the mention of heads on spikes. The memory of his father and brother, perhaps dead at the hands of the Mad King. The threat from Robert kindled a dark glint in Ned's eyes. "You will do no such thing in my hall," Ned said, voice low, lethal. "This is Winterfell, Robert. My forefathers built these walls long before your line took the throne. I have given you hospitality and friendship. Your thanks is to threaten my family." Robert, panting, hammered the end of his weapon into the stone floor. The ring of metal on stone cut through the hush. "Your bastard is the traitor, Ned. Not me. Hand him over and we can forget this foolishness." Ned hesitated. Jon saw the war inside him, loyalty to an old friend, to oaths sworn, battling with the raw reality of Robert's threat. For a moment, Jon thought Ned would yield him up. He would not blame his father for saving the North by sacrificing a bastard. But Ned Stark was not that kind of man. With a calmness that belied the chaos in the hall, Ned turned to Robert and said, "He is my son, and I will not stand aside while you threaten him in my own hall. If this is treason, then so be it." That statement seemed to echo from the rafters, a pronouncement that stunned every soul in attendance, for they understood that if Ned Stark took Jon's side, the lines were irrevocably drawn. Chaos threatened to break out. Men shouted, swords were half drawn. Jaime Lannister moved to protect the king. The king's retinue surged, but the northern guards drew a tight cordon. Robb, uncertain but resolute, stepped down from the dais to stand beside Ned and Jon. Arya clenched her teeth, refusing to leave her father's side. Sansa cowered, frightened, but dared not disobey her father either. In that instant, Robert realized that he was surrounded, outnumbered by northern men in their own seat of power. He swallowed, rage simmering, but no fool. He could not take on the entire North in this hall. Not without reinforcements. Ned's voice was a thunderous verdict. "In the name of House Stark, I command you to yield, Robert Baratheon. The safety of your retinue will be honored, but you are a guest in my hall, and you will show respect." Theon and two guards advanced to seize Robert's warhammer, but the king snarled and swung it once, forcing the men back. Jaime interposed, sword drawn. A standoff glimmered in the air. Ned raised his own sword, Ice, the ancient Valyrian steel of House Stark. The sight of that great blade halted Jaime's next step. Jaime knew he was cornered, that to fight in these conditions would be suicide. Cersei, lips twisted in fury, turned to Robert, hoping he might rally their men. But the hall was thick with armed northerners. There would be no rally. Only a massacre. Finally, Robert lowered his hammer, seething, his face red. "You dishonorable curs," he spat, his words stumbling with drunk anger. "Have it your way." Jon lowered his own blade, the tension in his limbs easing slightly. They had done it. The king was effectively taken prisoner in Winterfell. A smattering of gasps rippled through the crowd as those not privy to the plan struggled to grasp the enormity of this betrayal. Over the next hour, the king's retinue was disarmed. Jaime Lannister resisted at first, but after Ned gave his word no harm would come to them if they cooperated, Jaime consented, sheathing his sword. Cersei was livid, hissing venom at anyone who came near her. The bannermen loyal to the crown were escorted out of the hall under heavy guard, their weapons confiscated. In the aftermath, an eerie quiet settled upon Winterfell. Whispers buzzed like hornets. The king was confined to his chambers, guarded around the clock. Ravens were sent out bearing messages to the great houses of the north, explaining that the king had disrespected the laws of hospitality, threatened the Stark family, and forced their hand. Jon knew, of course, that these letters might be met with shock and condemnation across much of the realm. But the north would see a different picture. The lords of the mountain clans, the lords who had no love for southern tyranny, might gather to Winterfell's cause. Whether that would be enough to withstand the inevitable wrath of the Iron Throne remained to be seen. A council convened in the Solar with Ned, Robb, Jon, Theon, and a few of the senior officers of the Winterfell Guard. The mood was grim but charged with a sense of possibility. Ned stood behind a heavy wooden table, hands braced on its surface, looking as though he had aged 10 years in a single night. Robb paced nervously at the far side of the room, while Theon lounged against the wall, arms crossed, the hint of a grin never far from his lips. Jon felt the weight of what he had set in motion pressing down on him. The die was cast, indeed. Ned turned to Jon. "Tell me everything," he demanded softly, "from the beginning. How many men do you have in league with you? Which houses? What is your endgame?" Jon tried to sound confident. "There are many among the guard, perhaps a third, who support the cause. Others will fall in line out of loyalty to you. As for the houses, we have made overtures to House Manderly, House Glover, the mountain clans. Some have signaled willingness to support a move to restore the North's independence." He paused. I had hoped you would lead us, father. The disappointment in Ned's eyes was like a knife. You should have come to me, he said. I've no love for what Robert has done, for his arrogance, but we might have sought a path with fewer knives in the dark. Jon's voice cracked. I feared you would choose honor over action, or that you would refuse to place the North above your personal aids. I believed this was the only way. Robb added, voice taut with concern, Father, what will we do now? The king's men will march north once they hear what's happened. We'll be labeled traitors. Ned exhaled a heavy sigh. We must prepare for war, though I pray the gods guide us to a swifter resolution. Robert will not remain our prisoner forever. He might break free, or the Lannisters will move heaven and earth to rescue him. And once he's free, the crown will bring all of its might against the North. We must act decisively. Either we make peace or we brace for the storm. Theon snorted softly. Peace? After this? Better to call the banners and fortify Moat Cailin. Once the southern armies reach that bottleneck, we can hold them off indefinitely. Ned's features tightened. And what of winter? We cannot fight a prolonged war if the crops fail. Our people will starve. Better to die free than serve a king who scorns us, Jon said, though as soon as the words left his mouth, he felt the chill. He was condemning thousands to the potential horrors of war. But the path had been chosen. They debated long into the night. In the end, they decided to send ravens not just to the north but to selected houses in the Riverlands and the Vale, explaining the circumstances, hoping to rouse sympathy or at least neutrality. Theon suggested reaching out to Pike, but Ned quickly dismissed the idea. Balon Greyjoy's ambitions would not serve the North's cause. By dawn, an uneasy accord had been reached. Ned would publicly declare that the North would no longer bow to the Iron Throne unless new terms were negotiated that recognized the North's autonomy. Should the throne refuse, they would be at war. And if it came to war, Jon's name would be blackened across the Seven Kingdoms for setting events in motion, but at least the North would stand united under Ned Stark's leadership. That was what Jon had hoped for Ned to take up the mantle of a king in the North. Yet, in a cruel twist, it also meant that Ned might never look at Jon the same way again. That morning, as Ned left the Solar, he placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. For an instant, Jon thought he might embrace him, but Ned simply said, You have brought us to this place. May the gods forgive us both. Then he departed. The days that followed were tense. Robert's roaring fury could be heard echoing in the corridors at times. He was given a comfortable chamber but treated as a guarded prisoner, only allowed to walk in the courtyard at scheduled intervals. Jaime Lannister and Cersei were kept under similar guard, though neither was placed in a cell. Ned was no monster, he extended courtesy even to prisoners. The atmosphere in Winterfell was divided. Some soldiers congratulated Jon, whispering that he had done what was necessary. Others cursed him under their breath for plunging House Stark into such danger. Arya avoided Jon, uncertain how to speak to him now that he had effectively toppled the precarious peace. Sansa was terrified of the ramifications and kept mostly to her mother, who glowered at Jon every time she saw him. Catelyn Stark said nothing publicly, but Jon could feel her reproach. This was not how she wanted her children's future to unfold. Ravens flew in and out. Reports came that the Vale was in turmoil, that Lisa Arryn might not support the crown if she thought her son could remain safe in the Eyrie, away from the chaos. The Tullus in Riverrun sent cautious words urging a peaceful negotiation. The houses of the North, however, began rallying men for potential conflict. And at Moat Cailin, a strategic fortress that guarded the sole land route into the North, men loyal to Winterfell gathered to seal off the causeway if the southern armies marched. In King's Landing, chaos reigned once news arrived that Robert Baratheon was held captive by House Stark. The small council, led by the cunning Peter Baelish and the imperious P. Icelle, scrambled to maintain order. The Lannisters in particular took it as an outrageous affront. Rumors circulated that Tywin Lannister was mustering an army determined to avenge his daughter and free the king. War seemed inevitable. And yet, in Winterfell, behind the scenes of political maneuvering, Jon wrestled with the personal costs of his actions. Late one night, he stood on the battlements overlooking the courtyard, the snows drifting across the stones. Ghost stood beside him, ever watchful. Jon gazed down at the training yard where, not so long ago, he had sparred with Robb as King Robert's retinue looked on. That seemed another lifetime. He couldn't help but wonder if the cause he had triggered was truly worth the impending bloodshed. If war came, countless would die. Young men who had never even met Robert or Ned, caught up in a conflict they scarcely understood. Could he live with that? The voice that answered was grim, better to fight for freedom than submit to tyranny. So many men throughout the history of Westeros had made the same calculation, though, and the realm was littered with the bones of the fallen. He thought of seeking out Ned to unburden himself. but he could not bring himself to do it. Whatever closeness he once felt might not withstand another confrontation. Instead, he spoke softly to Ghost as though the dire wolf might offer some comfort. The wolf merely flicked his red eyes over Jon, exuding a silent, steadfast presence. Jon drew the furs around himself, bracing against the cold. Tomorrow, perhaps, would bring new tidings, a raven from the crown demanding Robert's release, or an ultimatum. He suspected the lines had already hardened too much for easy solutions. On the third day after the coup, Ned summoned Jon to the Solar. Inside, Theon was there, along with Robb. Ned stood near the window, hands behind his back. He turned, his face unreadable, though his eyes were shadowed by fatigue. "A raven came from King's Landing," he said quietly. "The small council demands Robert's release and our immediate submission to the crown's justice. Tywin Lannister has already begun gathering forces in the Westerlands. They will march north if we refuse." Robb, pale but resolute, said, "Then we fight." His voice trembled slightly, betraying the anxiety beneath his brave front. Theon said nothing, but Jon saw the hint of a grin, that thrill of conflict that Greyjoys rarely hid. Ned studied them. "We fight if we must, but do not think it will be simple. Tywin Lannister is a fearsome general. If House Tully does not back us, we'll have enemies on multiple fronts. Stannis and Renly Baratheon might muster the crown's navy. They could blockade White Harbor or send men by sea." He paused. "This will not be a short war." Jon squared his shoulders. "We knew the risks." He felt a pang of guilt as he recalled that Ned had not asked for those risks. Jon had forced them upon him, but he would stand by his convictions. "We must stand firm, or we'll lose all credibility. Surrender now and the crown will destroy our house's punishment." Ned nodded gravely. "Yes, I fear they would. Even if Robert himself was moved to leniency, the Lannisters will demand retribution." He turned back to the window, gazing out at the swirling snows. "Then it is decided. We will keep Robert until we can negotiate a treaty that guarantees the North's autonomy. If they refuse, we prepare for war." A weight pressed on Jon's chest at the finality of that statement. This was no longer just a dream of independence, it was a reality with grim consequences. The talk turned to strategy. How many men could they raise? How quickly? They had perhaps 30,000 fighting men if all the lords of the North answered the call, maybe more if the mountain clans joined wholeheartedly. That might stand a chance against the combined might of the West and the Crownlands, so long as they fought on northern ground. Moat Cailin would be the key, a fortress that had halted entire armies in centuries past. If the southern armies couldn't pass, the North would remain relatively safe. But if Moat Cailin fell, the road to Winterfell would be open. The conversation went on until late, each man weighed down by the burdens of the conflict to come. Outside, in the corridors, rumor had it that Robert had tried to bribe one of the guards into letting him go. The guard had refused. Another rumor claimed Jaime Lannister had demanded a trial by combat for his freedom. But Ned had not permitted it. This was not a question of personal guilt or innocence, but of the North's position in the realm. Cersei, for her part, had grown quieter, as if she were calculating how best to spin these events once news reached King's Landing in full detail. Joffrey sulked in his chambers, complaining about the cold and the lack of respect shown to him. No one missed his sour presence in the halls. The precarious peace within Winterfell's walls seemed ready to snap at any moment. In a twist of irony, it was on a morning bright with winter sunlight rare in these northern climes that news arrived of Tywin Lannister's first strike. A raven came bearing word that Lannister forces had crossed into the Riverlands, burning some outlying farms, presumably to threaten House Tully or draw them into the conflict on the crown's side. The cunning Lord Tywin was testing the loyalties of the Riverlands, forcing them to act. If the Tullys moved to defend their lands against the Lannisters, they might inadvertently align with the North. But if they hoped to avoid devastation, they might side with the crown. This was Tywin's gambit: sow fear, manipulate allegiances. Jon, Theon, and Robb heard the news from a breathless messenger who arrived covered in mud and sweat. They reported to Ned, who stood grimly by as the messenger relayed details of the Lannister raids. "It begins," Ned murmured, voice tinged with old pain. He recalled, no doubt, the way Tywin's forces had rampaged during Robert's rebellion, the sacking of King's Landing. War had never truly left Tywin Lannister's blood. That day, Ned finally did what Jon had half hoped, half dreaded. He stood in the courtyard, calling forth the people of Winterfell, from the highest lord to the lowest kitchen boy. He spoke in a somber voice, echoing across the courtyard. "Hear me now. The North stands at a crossroads. The crown demands our submission, and the Lannisters have begun to ravage the Riverlands to gain an advantage. Many of you may wonder why we stand in defiance of a king who was once my friend. But that friendship is now dust, ground beneath threats and dishonor. The men of the North have always prided themselves on loyalty and strength. Now, we must decide whether to bend to a king who scorns us or to stand as a free people. He paused, scanning the crowd. Jon, near the front, felt the swell of emotion, the sense that destiny was upon them all. Ned continued, "In days of old, my ancestors were kings in the North. That title was lost when Torrhen Stark knelt to Aegon the Conqueror, sacrificing the crown to save his people from dragonfire. Now, there are no dragons, no Targaryens of old. The realm is held together by men who would seek to take what is ours and ignore our plight. I say no more. Robert Baratheon is our prisoner, and though I wish it had never come to this, I will not release him until we have our rightful freedom. If the other kingdoms seek war, let them come. We will defend our lands." The hush that followed was broken by scattered cheers. Some men shouted Ned's name, others simply nodded in grim acceptance. Jon watched as Ned drew ice and lifted it skyward. "I, Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, do declare that henceforth we shall be free of the Iron Throne's yoke unless they grant us terms ensuring our sovereignty. Let any man who wishes to stand with me step forward now, and let any who wish to depart do so." No one moved to leave. A cry went up, "The King in the North!" Jon's chest tightened as he heard the old words. The crowd took it up, chanting softly at first, then louder, "The King in the North! The King in the North!" And though Ned Stark did not place a crown upon his head, the message was unmistakable. A wave of raw emotion swept Jon up in that moment. He had dreamed of this, dared to act, and now it was happening before his eyes. The North was choosing Ned Stark as its leader, not as a lord, but as a king once more. And yet, the costs lingered in the air. The war drums began to beat. Over the next fortnight, Northern bannermen arrived, swelling Winterfell's numbers. Robert Baratheon was moved to a more secure set of chambers, still well-treated, but with no illusions of freedom. Messages arrived from King's Landing demanding his release, each more furious than the last. Ned responded each time with the same reply. "The North will negotiate, but on terms that respect our sovereignty." The crown refused. Lines were drawn in blood and steel. Jon found himself hailed by some as a hero of the new Northern Kingdom, while others whispered that he was a rash bastard who had forced Ned Stark's hand. Jon accepted both verdicts in silence. At night, he prayed in the Godwood, seeking guidance, guilt gnawing at him. Ghost lingered, a silent sentinel among the ancient roots. Sometimes he saw Arya slipping through the trees, practicing her footwork with a wooden sword, glimpsing him from afar but never speaking. Robb was too busy planning defenses with Ned to speak often with Jon, though on one occasion they exchanged a tight embrace. "I never wanted this, Jon," Robb said, sorrow in his eyes. "But now that it's come, we must see it through." Jon nodded, understanding the burden that lay on Robb as Ned's heir. The final break came when Tywin Lannister officially crossed into the Riverlands with a full host, forcing Edmure Tully to rally his men. Word reached Winterfell that Tywin had declared Ned Stark and all his allies traitors to the crown. The rumor was that even the new hand of the king, some said it was Tywin himself or another Lannister puppet, was preparing official charges. The Targaryens had burned traitors with dragonfire. The Baratheon Lannister regime would presumably show no more mercy if it triumphed. The illusions were gone. The war had begun in earnest. Late that evening, Jon joined Ned, Robb, and Theon on the ramparts. Torches flickered and the cold wind bit. They gazed southward as if they could see the armies massing hundreds of leagues away. A hush stretched over them, broken at last by Ned's voice, so quiet that Jon almost missed it. "If Robert's rebellion taught me anything, it is that war always costs more than we bargain for. Innocents suffer. Families are torn apart. Even the victors bear scars. I pray the old gods watch over us." None of them spoke for a time. Then Theon said, with uncharacteristic solemnity, "We're past the point of no return. Whatever awaits, we'll face it as free men of the North." Robb nodded, but his face was etched with a fear he couldn't hide. Jon felt the full weight of his role in this, felt it like a great glacier pressing on his heart. And yet, when he peered into the darkness, he also felt a fierce certainty if the North could stand tall, it would finally be free of the condescension and disregard of the South. For too long, they had been at the mercy of kings who cared little for the hardships of winter, for the wildling raids, for the ancient traditions that bound the North. Now they had a chance, perhaps a slim one, but a chance to forge a different future. In the swirling snow, Jon imagined he heard a whisper of the old gods. Winter is coming, but so is a reckoning. In the days that followed, ravens arrived almost hourly with updates. House Manderley pledged 5,000 men to the new king in the north. House Glover pledged another 2,000. The Umbers, fierce as always, swore to bring their men down from the last hearth. Karstark remained uncertain at first, but soon committed as well, citing old grudges against the crown. The northern armies swelled to a formidable size. Ned decided to march southward to secure Moat Cailin and possibly meet the Tullus in the field. Robert Baratheon remained a captive in Winterfell, a symbolic hostage more than anything. Jaime Lannister had been placed in a separate tower, Cersei in still another, ensuring they could not conspire together. Joffrey was left to sulk in his lavish prison. Before Ned departed, he summoned Jon to the Great Hall. The banners of House Stark draped the walls, the dire wolf of gray on white. Ned sat in the high seat, ice across his lap. Jon knelt, uncertain of this formal summons. Ned's voice rang out. "Jon Snow, you have brought us to this path. We stand upon the edge of war, but also at the threshold of a new era for the North. I go south with our bannermen to secure our borders. You will remain here to safeguard Winterfell and to ensure that Robert Baratheon does not escape." Jon's eyes lifted in surprise. "Father, You are a Stark in all but name," Ned said, his voice carrying over the hall. "Though my heart weighs heavy with all that has transpired, I cannot deny that your actions have given the North a chance at independence. Guard it well. Tend to your siblings and your home." Jon swallowed. The import of the moment settled upon him. He sensed that Ned was granting him a measure of trust, if not forgiveness. "I will do my duty," Jon said, voice thick with emotion. A flicker of warmth passed through Ned's eyes, gone too soon. The assembly watched this exchange, uncertain whether to hail Jon as a hero or curse him as a usurper. But in Winterfell, where the memory of the old ways lingered, perhaps it did not matter. He was a son of Ned Stark, raised among them, and he would protect Winterfell with his life. That night, Ned Stark led a column of armored men out of Winterfell's gates, banners snapping in the frigid wind. Robb rode at his side, stern-faced, Theon behind them, swaggering but clearly anxious. Arya clung to her father in farewell, then stepped back with tears in her eyes. Sansa stood with Catelyn, the two of them wrapped in furs, fear etched across their features. Bran and Rickon stood by the gatehouse, too young to grasp the full implications but old enough to sense the weight of what was happening. Jon watched from the ramparts, heart clenched with a complex swirl of pride, guilt, and dread. He knew not what the future held, only that he had ignited a spark that now raged into a blaze across the Seven Kingdoms. As the northern host marched away, the trumpets sounding in the distance, Jon turned his gaze to the captive king and his retinue. Robert stood at a tower window, glowering down at the courtyard. The North had, indeed, risen against the crown. A coup had been born in these cold halls, led by a bastard with too much pride and too little to lose. Now, the realm teetered on the edge of a war that might reshape everything. Jon closed his eyes, recalling the words he had once read in an old tome: "When snow falls and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives." The North was a pack, bound by blood and honor, forging its own destiny now with the might of House Stark at the forefront. Jon could only pray that the pack would endure the storms to come. In the following weeks, Jon set about the work of consolidating control over Winterfell. He assigned loyal guards to every entrance, ensuring that no word from the king's party could slip out without oversight. He walked the corridors daily, checking that the servants and small folk remained calm. Some had fled, heading for smaller holdings in the countryside, fearful of what might happen if the war turned against them. Still, many remained loyal to House Stark, if not necessarily to the cause of rebellion. Jon held daily audiences, settling petty disputes, livestock gone missing, arguments over food stores, minor infractions that in normal times would be resolved by Ned or the steward. Each mundane duty reminded Jon of the burden of leadership. It was not all glory and battle cries. It was ensuring people ate, ensuring the wells did not freeze, ensuring discipline among the guard. Meanwhile, Robert grew restless in his confinement. Cersei glided through the halls like a cornered lioness, her anger cold and calculating. Jaime tested the guards' nerves with japes and sneers. Joffrey threw tantrums. Sometimes Jon had to enforce the rules personally. Once, he cornered Jaime in the courtyard when Jaime demanded honorable single combat for his freedom. Jaime's golden hair shone in the winter sun, his face twisted with frustration. Jon refused. "I will not risk the cause of the North on a duel, Sir Jaime," Jon said, meeting the Kingslayer's glare. "You can't talk or fight your way out of this one. Not unless my Lord Father allows it." Jaime stared at him, anger smoldering. "I killed Aerys Targaryen for less than what you're doing. You realize that, don't you?" he said, his voice a low hiss. Jon nodded. He knew Jaime's reputation, but fear gave way to resolve in Jon's heart. "We're at war, Sir Jaime. If you wish to do your killing, it'll have to wait until the lines are drawn on the battlefield. Until then, you are a prisoner." Jaime snorted but said nothing more, turning away with a swirl of his cloak. So it went day after day, tension coiling like a snake. Outside the walls, news trickled in of skirmishes in the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister had sacked several small holdfasts. Edmure Tully's forces fought bravely, but the odds were stacked against them unless more northern troops arrived. Meanwhile, the Crown mustered its forces in King's Landing. Stannis and Renly were rumored to be in fierce disagreement about how to proceed. The southern lords bickered, uncertain how best to handle a rebellion so far to the north. That uncertainty might buy Ned time. One chilly morning, Jon was surprised by a visit from Maester Luwin. The Maester found him in the library, pacing near the shelves stacked with old tomes of Stark history. Jon had come there in search of a record about the last time the North had been independent, hoping to glean some insight on how they had governed themselves before Torrhen knelt. Luwin looked weary, but his voice was gentle. "Jon, might I speak with you?" Jon gestured for him to proceed. Luwin lowered his gaze. "I have known you since you were a child. You were always eager to learn, and I have watched how you've struggled with your place in this house. This path you have chosen, it is a heavy burden for one so young. I hope you know that, whatever happens, the people of Winterfell remember your kindness." Jon blinked. "Kindness?" Luwin nodded. You treated servants with respect. You looked after your siblings in your own quiet way. You never asked for more than scraps of recognition. And now you have the power to shape the fate of the North." He sighed. "I only caution you. Power is a terrible and deadly thing if not tempered with compassion and wisdom." Jon considered the Maester's words. "I do not seek glory, Maester. I only wanted the North to be free from men like Robert, who take what they want and give little in return." Luwin smiled sadly. "I know, but war is an unpredictable forge. Let us hope something strong and just emerges, and that you do not lose yourself in the flames." Jon gave a slight nod. The Maester's concerns echoed his own fears. Each day he clung to the hope that Ned would negotiate a settlement that granted the North its due. But he knew the Lannisters would not easily yield, nor would the Crown. All he could do was hold Winterfell, keep Robert confined, and pray. The first major battle came weeks later near the Twins, where Ned Stark's force joined with the Tullys to repel a Lannister advance. Ravens arrived with frantic updates. The fighting was fierce, the outcome uncertain. Then, at last, a messenger reached Winterfell with news that the North had prevailed in a hard-won victory. Tywin's vanguard had been defeated, forcing him to retreat further south. There was jubilation in Winterfell upon hearing that the king in the North, an unofficial title Ned did not openly claim but that his men roared in the thick of battle, had drawn first blood. Jon felt a surge of relief. Perhaps victory was possible. Perhaps the sacrifice would be worth it. Yet the war had only begun. In the south, Renly Baratheon broke from the crown and declared himself king, citing Robert's captivity as evidence that the realm needed a stable monarch. Stannis, outraged, assembled a fleet. The Tyrells hesitated, uncertain whom to back. The realm was fracturing into multiple claims. Chaos spread like wildfire, overshadowing even the North's secession. As the weeks passed, talk among the small folk in Winterfell turned to rumors of multiple kings. King in the North, king on the Iron Throne, king in Highgarden, king in the Stormlands. The War of Five Kings, some called it in hushed whispers. Jon listened, heart pounding. He had ignited one spark, and it seemed the entire tinderbox of Westeros had gone up in flames. As the harsh northern winter continued to tighten its grip, a hush settled over Winterfell. Food became scarcer, rationing more severe. Jon made sure King Robert and his party were fed decently, but not lavishly. He recalled the king's feasts and wondered if Robert ever regretted his waste now that he lived in captivity, reliant on the generosity of the very people he had disdained. Robert seemed to wilt in confinement. Occasionally, Jon glimpsed the once boisterous king in the courtyard, cloak drawn tight, face pallid in the cold. The robust man who had arrived at Winterfell full of laughter and jests was gone, replaced by a bitter, sullen shadow. The days turned into a swirl of minor crises. Managing supplies, quelling arguments among soldiers, intercepting potential spies. Jon found no solace except late at night, when he would stand on the battlements, gazing into the distance, ghost at his side. Sometimes, he thought he heard the faint howling of other direwolves in the darkness, echoing across the plains. He wondered if it was a sign, a warning, or simply the call of nature in a land that rarely knew peace. On one such night, Arya came to him, slipping past the guards with her characteristic stealth. She stood beside him, her breath a mist in the cold air. "You started this, didn't you?" she said quietly, not accusing but curious. "I mean, father wouldn't have done it on his own. You pushed him." Jon swallowed, exhaling a visible puff of breath. "I did. I couldn't stand the way Robert treated us, treated father. The North deserves better." Arya nodded. "I think so, too, but I'm scared. Father's out there fighting battles, risking his life. We could lose him or Robb or you." Jon placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know. War is frightening, but Starks endure, Arya. We always have." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Just come back if you ever have to go south to fight. Please." Jon felt a lump in his throat. "I will," he managed. Arya sniffed, gave him a swift embrace, then scampered off into the night, leaving Jon feeling a pang of gratitude for the bond they shared, even as war threatened to tear the realm apart. More time passed. Ned's letters recounted skirmishes, alliances, near victories, and near defeats. The Tullus stood firm with the North. The Freys, as ever, played both sides, seeking advantage. Still, the Lannisters did not yield. Tywin retreated, waited for reinforcements, struck again. The cycle repeated. Winter turned deeper and supplies ran low. Even in Winterfell, a certain hunger gnawed at men's bellies. Some whispered that the North might starve if the war dragged on another year. Jon felt that worry keenly. He had begun to wonder if the cause of independence was truly worth such suffering. But whenever he saw the captive king, that dismissive arrogance still hovered in Robert's eyes, or the memory of it. Jon hardened his resolve. He told himself that the North would persevere. At last, a message arrived that changed the shape of things. King Robert Baratheon was taken ill. The maester who tended him suspected a problem with his heart, aggravated by drink and lack of movement. He lingered on the edge of death, cursing and sweating through fevered nightmares. This development sent ripples through Winterfell's corridors. If Robert died in captivity, the crown would show no mercy. And yet, Jon realized, if Robert died, the political landscape might shift. Perhaps negotiations could proceed with another occupant of the throne, be it Joffrey or Stannis or Renly. Ned returned briefly from the front to oversee the situation, conferring with Maester Luwin. They attempted to nurse Robert back to health, but the king resisted their care, bellowing at them to leave him be. By the third night of his fever, Robert's condition worsened. Ned visited him, alone, in the flickering candlelight. Outside, Jon waited, uncertain what words they might exchange after all these weeks of simmering hatred. A few hours later, Ned emerged, solemn. "He is dying," Ned said. "He asked for wine, but I refused. The maester says it would only worsen his condition." A haunted look crossed Ned's face. He raved about Lyanna, about the rebellion, about how he should have killed every Targaryen. I could scarcely understand him. Then he fell quiet. The next morning, King Robert Baratheon died in the same room where the Starks had first given him hospitality. Jon stood outside in the corridor as the final death rattle echoed. Silence fell. The king was dead. It was done. In that silent corridor, Jon felt a rush of conflicting emotions: relief, fear, sorrow for what might have been. He recalled that Robert had once been like a brother to Ned. In that sense, a bond from the days of Robert's rebellion had ended in tragedy within these northern walls. The realm would be thrown into greater chaos. But also, with Robert gone, the impetus for war might ease, or it might explode tenfold. Cersei and Jaime, upon hearing the news, demanded that Joffrey be recognized as the rightful king and released to claim his throne. Ned refused. Tension soared. The entire Lannister retinue seemed ready to riot, but they had no weapons, and the northern guards held firm. Days later, another messenger arrived from the south, breathless and wide-eyed. Joffrey Baratheon had been crowned in King's Landing, proclaiming himself King of the Undulls and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. The boy king demanded the immediate return of his mother and the body of his father, the late Robert Baratheon, under threat of total war if House Stark refused. Jon read the parchment with a sense of grim inevitability. The specter of war had not faded with Robert's passing, it had only assumed a new face. A crueler face if rumors of Joffrey's nature were true. Ned, standing amid the lords in Winterfell's hall, closed his eyes. "We will send Robert's body south for a proper burial, as befits a king," he declared. "But the queen and her children remain prisoners until the throne grants the North its freedom." That statement rippled through the crowd. The war would go on. The great drama that had begun the day Jon confronted Robert at the midnight feast had not yet reached its conclusion. In the gloom of Winterfell's Godwood, Jon knelt at the base of the heart tree, the blood-red leaves rustling overhead. Snow blanketed the ground in a soft hush. He pressed his hand against the weirwood's pale trunk, feeling the ancient bark cold against his skin. He whispered a prayer to the old gods, asking for forgiveness, for wisdom, for the North's deliverance. In that stillness, he thought of all that had happened since the coup, how a single spark in his bastard heart had ignited a conflagration across the realm. Was he a hero or a villain or something in between? Did it even matter? The realm was changed and there would be no turning back. He took a shaky breath, rose, and left the grove. Outside, Ghost awaited him, eyes gleaming. The direwolf fell into step beside him as Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, who had once yearned to join the Night's Watch and be free of politics, walked into the castle that now served as the cradle of a rebellion. The snow swirled around them and the wind carried the distant sound of steel forging in the smithy, of men drilling in the yard, of 1,000 small tasks that made a war machine churn. The North had chosen its path, and Jon Snow, for better or worse, had set them upon it. And so the story continued, far from finished. The War of Five Kings would rage across the land, each faction vying for control, alliances shifting like the winter winds. The North, under Ned Stark, remained resolute in its bid for sovereignty. Whether they would hold it or see their dream crushed beneath Southern might, no one could say. But one thing was certain. The seeds of revolution had been planted on a cold night in Winterfell, and the realm would never be the same. In the silence of the falling snow, Jon Snow realized that sometimes a single act, born of anger and pride, could reshape the destiny of nations. And he vowed, with all the stubborn resolve of a son of Ned Stark, that he would not let the North be trampled. If blood must be spilled, so be it. The old gods bore witness, and winter's promise loomed. War had come, and with it, the chance for a rebirth if they could weather the storm. In the hush that followed King Robert Baratheon's final breath, Winterfell seemed to hold itself in a stunned suspension, as if all the old stones and timbers had ceased breathing too. Outside the tower of the first keep, where Robert had passed, the sky was a pale steel gray, and a slow, powdery snow drifted down over the courtyard. The men who had guarded the tower stood in uneasy silence, their breath steaming in the frigid air. A pair of ravens, perched high on the battlements, watched with black, glassy eyes as Lord Eddard Stark emerged from within, looking older and heavier of spirit than he ever had before. Behind him, the maester and 2 attendants followed, faces grim. No one spoke. No one needed to. The king who had once laughed and reveled in these halls had died a captive, undone by sickness as much as by the intrigues that had led him here. Jon Snow stood nearby in the courtyard, the wind tugging lightly at his cloak, ghost a pale shape beside him. He felt the moment's weight more keenly than he might have expected. This man, Robert Baratheon, had once been Ned Stark's closest friend, an uncle figure of sorts to the Stark children when they were younger. But for Jon, Robert was more a symbol of southern rule, of arrogance, of the danger that came when the North bent the knee to a king who did not understand or respect them. Once, not so long ago, Jon had believed that Robert's presence at Winterfell was just another passing annoyance. Yet now Robert's death, here of all places, felt like a pivot on which the fate of the realm turned. He recalled the night he had confronted the king in the Great Hall, demanding that he yield or respect the North. He remembered Robert's sneering fury, the locked doors, the ring of steel. The entire realm had begun to fracture in that instant, though the seeds of chaos had already been sown by other events. Some far away in King's Landing, others in the distant east, and still others in the hearts of men who had long harbored resentments. Jon told himself that he had only sparked what would have been inevitable. But as he watched Ned stand in the snow, overshadowed by grief, he knew he bore responsibility as well. Ned turned to the gathering guards and spoke quietly. "The king is dead. We shall prepare his body for its journey south so that he may be buried as befits a Baratheon." His voice carried despite its softness. There was no joy or satisfaction in it, only a distant sorrow. "See to it with respect." Some of the guards bowed their heads, understanding the gravity of the moment. Ned paused, looking toward Jon. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and Jon felt a pang of guilt twist in his gut. All the old arguments between Ned and Robert, all the rifts that had opened, had ended with death, unsurprising in a land so rife with war, but still unthinkable to the Ned Stark who had once ridden south to help Robert claim the Iron Throne. Now the North was in open rebellion, and Robert's corpse would be carried home as a prisoner's remains. In the days that followed, the rush of practicalities overcame Winterfell's initial hush of shock. The best carpenters built a coffin worthy of a king, lined with lead to preserve Robert's body for the journey. Maester Luwin oversaw the embalming process with all the skill he possessed. Snow-laden clouds churned over the castle, and freezing winds hammered the gates as men came and went, bringing tidings of war. Ravens swooped in, bearing messages from throughout the realm, fresh demands from Joffrey Baratheon, newly crowned in King's Landing, who raged from afar at his father's captivity and demise. Even so, Ned had decided Robert's body would be sent south under careful guard once the roads were somewhat passable. But as the blizzards intensified, travel became a perilous affair. Reports of the Lannisters' maneuvers in the Riverlands continued. Lord Tywin was regrouping after a stinging defeat but remained dangerously powerful. House Tully braced for further onslaughts. Northmen under Ned's command patrolled the route near the Twins, reinforcing alliances with or pressing the frays. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton and other lords had begun to gather men at strategic points. Moat Cailin remained heavily garrisoned, a chokehold that would hamper any crown army that dared march up the neck. And within Winterfell itself, the presence of captive Lannisters and Baratheons still coiled like a snake underfoot. Cersei was livid at her husband's death in these halls, no matter that disease and wine had finished him off more than any northern blade. Jaime Lannister, in his tower room, awaited the merest sign of weakness or a chance to exploit. Joffrey sulked, unaccustomed to confinement, and demanded that Winterfell's guards bow to him as king whenever they entered his presence, though they did so only with mockery in their eyes or not at all. Jon, for his part, was consumed by duties that Ned had placed upon him before riding out once more to handle a skirmish near the White Knife. Ned came and went from Winterfell now, never staying longer than the time needed to settle immediate matters. The burden of running the castle through a war fell upon Jon and Ser Roderick Castle, with Maester Luwin guiding them. Jon had always imagined the weight of command to be something glorious, leading men in battle, forging alliances, but discovered that much of it was endless toil. At dawn, he was already in the courtyard, resolving disputes among soldiers, assigning rations, inspecting the stables, checking the watch rotations. By midday, he was reviewing the supply records with the steward, trying to ensure the storehouses would last the winter if the conflict dragged on. By evening, He found himself often summoned to quell yet another drunken brawl. All the while, the tension in the castle thickened. The captive Lannisters yearned for vengeance, and though they were disarmed, they still had tongues that dripped with scorn. Cersei's ladies-in-waiting, few though they were, seemed to conspire in corners. Queen Cersei herself seldom left her quarters, except to prowl through the corridors as if searching for an escape route. Jaime Lannister tried several times to speak with Jon, either taunting or cajoling, but Jon refused to engage beyond the most necessary exchange of words. The memory of Jaime's mocking remarks about bastards still stung, and Jon had little inclination to share any conversation with a man who would likely slit his throat at the first opportunity. Theon Greyjoy found these undercurrents thrilling. He strutted about the courtyard, sword at his hip, smiling at every tense stare. At times, he boasted that once the war was done, perhaps Pike would join the North in throwing off the shackles of the Iron Throne. Jon warned him that Ned would not look kindly on a second Greyjoy rebellion, but Theon only shrugged. "All rebellions begin as seeds," he said. "You of all people should know that." There was truth in that statement, and it rankled Jon more than he liked to admit. Inside the Great Keep, Sansa's eyes would dart from face to face, as though searching for some vestige of the polite courtly world she had once dreamed of. It had vanished the night her father chose to defy Robert, or perhaps even earlier, the moment King Robert set foot in Winterfell. Arya took the chaos in stride, sparring with wooden swords or sneaking off to the Godswood. Bran and Rickon rarely saw Ned now, except when he returned to gather fresh troops or confer with the Maester. The castle's children had grown cautious, quiet in the face of war. On the 12th day after Robert's death, a battered raven arrived from Riverrun, carrying news that Tywin Lannister had launched a second major assault into the Riverlands, ravaging villages, punishing Tully bannermen who dared oppose him. Edmure Tully had appealed desperately for reinforcements. The letter stressed that if the North did not send more troops soon, the Riverlands might break under the Lannisters' wrath. That very evening, Ned Stark returned. The courtyard gates opened to admit him along with a small retinue of Lord's bannermen, Lord Manderly of White Harbor, his son Ser Wylis, Lord Karstark's second son Harrion, and a handful of others. Their horses stomped and snorted in the cold as stable boys came running. Jon hurried to meet them, heart pounding at the worry etched on Ned's face. They gathered in Ned's solar, a modest fire crackling in the hearth, while a single candle on the table cast flickering light on the maps that were laid out: the Riverlands, the Neck, the North. The lords who had accompanied Ned stood around, arms folded or hands resting on sword belts, clearly fatigued from travel. A hush settled when Ned spoke. "The Lannisters have struck anew," he said gravely, likely under Lord Tywin's direct command. "Ser Gregor Clegane leads raiding parties, terrorizing villages, murdering small folk. The Tullys have asked for our aid, lest the Riverlands burn to ash." He paused, gaze sweeping the group. "We swore friendship with the Tullys long ago. They are kin to this house. We must respond, if only to prevent Tywin from turning his entire host northward." Jon stood beside Theon, arms crossed, glancing at the map. "How many men do we have to spare? We still hold Moat Cailin, and men are needed here in Winterfell in case the Crown attempts some rescue for the captives." Ned nodded. "Agreed, we cannot leave ourselves undefended. Yet we must send a sizable force to relieve Riverrun." His eyes lingered on the map, tracing roads and rivers. "If the Lannisters break the Riverlands completely, they will have free rein to threaten us from the south once the snows ease." Lord Manderly, a stout man with watery blue eyes, spoke up. "White Harbor can spare another 1,000 men, though it will stretch our defenses thin. We still must watch the sea for any Baratheon or Royal Navy approach." Harry and Karstark weighed in next. "The Karstarks stand ready, though my father's portion is already encamped near the Twins. If we combine forces, why? Take Lord Bolton's men, we might field 3,000. That might be enough to turn back the raiding parties, if we move swiftly." Ned listened, absorbing each offer. He looked at Jon. "You have kept Winterfell well in my absence. I would call upon you again. You have a bond with Theon, and a bond with many of our men here. I want you to march south with Harry and Karstark and assist Edmure Tully's defense. Your presence will reassure the lords of the Riverlands that House Stark stands with them. The men who remain will be under Ser Roderick's command, and Lady Catelyn will oversee the castle's domestic matters while I press east to handle a potential threat near the Vale border." Jon's pulse quickened. This was the first time Ned had directly given him command of an expedition. A swirl of emotions coursed through him: gratitude at his father's trust, dread of the danger, and a fierce spark of purpose. "I'll do whatever you ask, father," he said quietly. He had sparked this rebellion, so if war needed waging, he would wage it. Theon grinned, hand on his sword. "I'll ride with him, Lord Stark. The Lannisters won't know what hit them." Ned let out a soft breath. "This is no joyous adventure, Theon. War in the Riverlands is cruel. The small folk suffer most. We want to end this quickly." Jon felt the weight of that statement. Men who yearned for glory rarely understood the true face of war. He resolved not to indulge any illusions. If the Riverlands were as ravaged as the letters claimed, it would not be a matter of shining battles but a slog through ash and ruin. Still, they could not stand by. They finalized plans late into the night, deciding how many men to send, which route to take, how best to coordinate with the Tully forces. Ned would dispatch ravens to Riverrun announcing their coming. By the time dawn's pale light filtered through the snow clouds, the decisions had been made. Jon would leave within 2 days, leading a mixed force of about 2,000 Northerners, Karstarks, Mandalese, and men sworn directly to Winterfell. He would take them through the Neck, coordinate with Roose Bolton at the Twins, and from there make for Riverrun. After the War Council, Ned lingered with Jon briefly in the corridor outside his solar. Ghost padded at Jon's side, silent as snowfall. The hall was torchlit, shadows dancing on the walls. They could hear men's voices echoing from the stairwell as they readied themselves for rest or for the next day's tasks. Ned halted near a narrow window, gazing out at the white courtyard. He was silent a long moment before he spoke. "I never imagined we would come to this point, with Robert dead in Winterfell, the realm fractured, and the North fighting for its independence. It feels like a nightmare I cannot wake from." Jon studied his father's face. The lines of strain were deeper than ever, but behind that fatigue, there was a kind of resolve. "We're here now, father," Jon said softly, "and I believe the North can stand on its own. This war, difficult though it is, may be the only way to secure our future." Ned turned to him. The faint light illuminated Ned's gray eyes, and Jon could see the swirl of sorrow there. "I understand why you did what you did," Ned said, "even if I cannot condone all the methods. Robert was once like a brother to me. I did not want to see him come to harm." His voice dropped. "Yet the king he became was not the friend I remembered. Perhaps the fault is mine as much as his." Jon felt a painful knot in his chest. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I never meant for him to die here, or for the realm to be torn apart. I only wanted the North to be free from a man who scorned us." Ned looked away, eyes on the drifting snow. "I know. Now we must do what we can to see this through. You will ride south with our men. Do your duty. But remember who we are, Jon. We are Starks. There is honor in being of the North, even in war. Take no joy in the blood you spill, but stand firm for our people. That is all I ask." Jon bowed his head. "I won't forget, father." Their conversation ended in a silence that felt like an unspoken acknowledgement. Father and son, parted by a war begun in these very halls, yet bound by the name they both carried, Stark in spirit if not in law for Jon. The next day was a frenzy of preparation. Horses were shoed, wagons loaded with provisions, and scouts briefed on the route. The courtyard rang with the hammer blows of blacksmiths, the stamping of hooves, the barked commands of officers assembling their ranks. Jon spent hours checking on everything, from the state of the supply wagons to the numbering of new conscripts who had arrived from the local villages. Theon oversaw the muster of the Greyjoy men, most of them mere thralls or hired swords he claimed to have recruited. Harrion Karstark accounted for his father's men, dour-faced warriors who had marched from Carhold and were eager for southern plunder. Arya found Jon in the stables at midday, watching as stable boys fed and watered the war horses. She wore a thick cloak, her hair still tangled in that half-braided style, and a wooden practice sword hung at her belt alongside a real dagger. Ghost was dozing in the straw, only half awake as Arya approached. Jon paused in his work, an ache already forming because he did not know when he might see her again. She was so young, 11 at most, but war did not spare the young. "Are you truly leaving tomorrow?" Arya asked, eyes searching his. Jon nodded. "Father wants me to lead our men to Riverrun. I have to." Arya bit her lip. "I wish I could come. I can fight in my own way." Jon forced a small smile. "I know you can, little sister, but your place is here with your family, at least until father decides otherwise. War is not all swordplay. You wouldn't like the things you'd see." Her gaze shifted, and she looked older than her years. "I've seen enough already. The world's not a song. Is it?" "No," he said, voice quiet. "It's not a song." She stepped closer. "Then promise me something. Come back." Jon hesitated, thinking of all that might happen in the Riverlands. Ambushes, disease, the unpredictability of war. Yet he placed a hand on her shoulder. "I promise I'll try with all my strength, but I can't predict the gods' will." She huffed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "The gods can keep out of it. Just don't do anything stupid, like getting yourself killed." Despite the heaviness of the moment, Jon felt a wry tug at the corner of his mouth. "I'll keep that in mind." Then, lowering his voice, he asked, "Will you look in on Ghost if I'm gone longer than expected? I'll take him with me, but if for any reason he has to be sent back, will you see that he's cared for?" Her eyes lit a bit. "Of course. He's family." Jon gave her a swift, gentle hug. She stiffened. Affection was never something Arya wore easily, but then her arms slipped around him in return. It was a brief moment of closeness in a castle where everything had grown tense. Afterward, she pulled back, gave him a firm nod, and hurried out of the stables, determined not to let him see any tears. That evening, Jon visited the crypts beneath Winterfell. Flickering torches cast moving shadows along the ancient stone faces of dead Starks. The air was cool, the damp walls echoing each footstep. Jon could almost feel the weight of all those who had gone before. Lords, kings, and queens of the north. He found the statue of Lyanna Stark, her likeness carved in stone. He stood there for a moment, remembering how King Robert had once come down here to brood over the memory of Ned's sister. That memory felt like it belonged to another age. Now, Robert himself lay cold as well, entombed upstairs in a leaden coffin. Fate, it seemed, had woven a cruel circle. Jon closed his eyes. Sometimes he sensed a hidden significance in the crypts. He did not understand the secrets Ned held about his mother. Secrets whispered of Rhaegar Targaryen or Ash Dane or some unknown woman. He had grown up never knowing the truth. But as a chill wind whispered through the corridor, Jon let go of the question. Perhaps it mattered less now that war had come. He had chosen the path of a Stark, that was what mattered. Let the rest remain in the darkness. On the morning of the departure, the courtyard was a swirl of cloaks and steel. The winter sun offered little warmth, but the men had that determined set to their faces that comes when duty calls. Jon donned boiled leather beneath a cloak of thick gray wool, with a surcoat bearing the direwolf sigil. Perhaps not his by birth, but by heart it was. Ghost padded at his side, almost unervingly silent amidst all the commotion. Theon wore a cocky grin, his Kraken sigil displayed on a small badge. Harrion Karstark and a handful of Karstark knights waited at the gate. In total, 2,000 men with horses, supply wagons, and a small train of blacksmiths, farriers, and servants prepared to march south. Before Jon mounted his horse, he caught sight of Sansa in one of the keep's windows, watching anxiously. Her eyes were wide, her hands clasped in front of her. She offered him a timid wave. Perhaps she was still frightened by the notion of war, or perhaps she simply did not know how to speak to her half-brother who had become a catalyst for so much. Jon raised a hand in return, then swung into the saddle. He glanced at Ned, who stood at the steps with Lord Manderley and Ser Roderick, giving last-minute instructions. When Ned saw Jon looking, he gave a grave nod, a reminder of the trust he was placing in him. The gates opened to a world of white drifts and iron-gray skies. Horns sounded, and slowly, the army of the north began its march. Horses snorted, breath steaming, hooves crunching in the snow. The banners of Stark, Karstark, and Manderley fluttered in the wind. Theon rode near Jon, that reckless spark in his eyes. Harry Karstark, more taciturn, led his riders on the right flank. Ghost trotted alongside Jon's horse, unbothered by the cold. They traveled slowly at first, winding through the roads near Winterfell, passing farmsteads where small folk peered out from shuttered windows. The men called out encouragement to the Watchers, promises to protect the North, to bring them honor, though it often sounded more like a soldier's bravado than actual reassurance. Jon's mind was preoccupied with the reality that he was leading these men into potential devastation. He had to hold firm or risk losing them all in some Lannister ambush. At each pause in the journey, Jon conversed with Harry and Karstark about their battle plans. Though Harry was younger than Robb by 2 years or so, he carried himself with a grim seriousness. He had lost 2 brothers to the war already. Torrhen and Eddard Karstark had been slain in skirmishes with Lannisters or Crown forces, so rumor said. That loss weighed on him, and Jon sensed Harry's thirst for vengeance. While Theon joked and boasted at night by the fires, Harry rarely smiled. For nearly a fortnight, they picked their way south through the labyrinthine causeways and marshes of the Neck. The going was slow, hindered by patches of frozen swamp and hidden sinkholes. The reeds of Greywater Watch had pledged to keep the paths safe, sending occasional guides who appeared from the mist-shrouded wetlands with mud-caked boots and reed-camouflaged spears. Jon was grateful for their help. Without it, they might have lost men to the bogs. Here, in the frigid, misty wetlands, the war seemed distant for a moment, replaced by the timeless hush of the marshes. But the specter of conflict remained, haunting every step. At Mo Cailin, they paused. The fortress's stone towers jutted up from the swampy ground like broken teeth, ancient and forbidding. Dozens of northern soldiers manned the battlements, watchful for any sign of southern approach. Here Jon conferred with the garrison's captain. He learned that no Crown army had attempted the Neck yet. Likely they were all busy with the battles in the Riverlands or the fracturing politics in King's Landing. Leaving a small contingent to bolster Moat Cailin's defenses, Jon led the bulk of his forces further south, emerging from the Neck into the upper Riverlands. The land changed before their eyes, from marshy bogs to rolling hills and wooded groves. But they found signs of war soon enough: burnt farmhouses, blackened fields, and refugees wandering the roads with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes. Some knelt by the roadside as the northern army passed, begging for bread, for a place of safety. Jon did what he could, distributing some of their supplies, but they had only so much to spare. He felt an uneasy pang at the realization that these small folk were as likely to fear Starks or Karstarks as Lannisters. All lords might be their doom. As they neared the Twins, the seat of House Frey, they saw the high bridge spanning the green fork of the Trident. The Twins looked imposing, twin towers on either side of the river, linked by a fortified bridge. Walder Frey, the ancient, cunning lord who controlled that crossing, had once sworn to uphold an alliance with the Starks, but after Robert's captivity and the outbreak of the war, trust was in short supply. Ned's previous negotiations had led the Freys to remain nominally on the Tully Stark's side, though in truth they might betray them at any moment if it suited them. Jon sent a messenger to the gate, requesting permission to cross. After a tense wait, the great portcullis rose and a smaller gate swung open. Ser Ryman Frey, one of Walder Frey's many grandsons, emerged with a dozen guards. He was a lank, sour-faced man with watery eyes. "Lord Snow," Ser Ryman said, giving a slight, mocking bow. "Or should I call you Master-at-Arms? Bastard Commander? Hard to know what to name one of your station." Jon felt Theon bristle beside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Jon Snow will suffice," he said in a measured tone. "We intend to cross and ride to Riverrun. Will you grant a safe passage?" Ryman gave a thin smile. "You're welcome to cross, to be sure. For a toll, of course. And we'd be grateful to learn precisely how many men you bring so that we can accommodate your crossing." Jon signaled to Harry Karstark, and Harry stepped forward with a curt nod. "We have nearly 2,000. The terms of your house's alliance with the Tullys should allow us to cross without undue delay." Ser Ryman shrugged as though bored. "Certainly, but Lord Walder insists on a modest toll. Times are hard, you know, with so many armies about." Jon tempered his annoyance. This was classic Frey behavior, profiting from war without risking direct confrontation. They had done so under the Targaryens, under Robert, and no doubt they would do the same for whomever wore a crown next. "What does Lord Walder require?" Ryman named a sum of coin that made Theon curse under his breath. Jon merely inclined his head. "We will pay, though we can scarcely afford such a sum. But know this, we are riding to aid the Tullys, your overlords. If Riverrun falls, do you truly believe the Lannisters will spare the Twins?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed Ryman's face. as though that possibility had not fully registered. "Those are not matters for me to decide. We only follow the Lord's commands." Jon sighed. "Very well, we will pay. But be aware that if House Fry stands idle while the Riverlands burn, no one will forget." Coins exchanged hands that afternoon. The crossing took hours, as the men filed in columns over the narrow bridge, wagons rattling, horses snorting. The Fry men-at-arms looked on with unreadable faces. Jon glimpsed a few of the many Fry children peering from tower windows, wide-eyed at the passing host. He felt a sense of relief once they were on the other side, leaving behind the twisted loyalties of the twins. From there, they pressed on, heading southwest toward Riverrun. The countryside wore the scars of war more plainly. Smoldering ruins, fields strewn with rotting crops, the occasional row of gallows where Lannister men or Tully men had hanged suspected traitors. Jon began sending out outriders to scout for any sign of enemy activity. At night, they doubled the perimeter around their camp, mindful that Ser Gregor Clegane's raiders could fall upon them unexpectedly. 5 days from Riverrun, they found the first true battle site, a scorched village called Braemore, its huts burned to the foundations, bodies lying unburied in the muddy lane. Harry and Karstark turned pale at the sight. Theon spat curses at the men who had done such a thing. Jon ordered a small detail to bury the dead and gather any survivors. They found one old man hidden in a half-collapsed barn, trembling from cold and hunger. Between chattering teeth, he babbled about monstrous knights in lion-crested armor, torches lighting the night, the screams of his neighbors. "Do you know if they went east or west afterward?" Jon asked gently, squatting by the old man, offering him a skin of water. The man shook his head frantically, eyes wide with trauma. "Gone, gone." "Took the women?" "Oh gods, they were devils." Jon exchanged a grim look with Harrion. This was the reality of Tywin's war. The old man could give them no real direction. Once the burial detail finished, the army moved on, heavier of heart. At last, they reached Riverrun territory. The castle rose where the Red Fork and the Tumblestone rivers converged, an impressive stronghold with water on 2 sides and a moat on the 3rd. As they approached, they saw Tully banners flying, though the walls and towers bore fresh scars from battle. Burn marks, broken battlements hastily repaired. A few outriders in Tully colors rode forth to challenge them, then recognized the Stark banners and escorted them to the gates. They found Edmure Tully waiting in the courtyard, clad in armor scratched and dented from recent skirmishes. He looked tired, but relief flooded his features when he saw the size of the northern contingent. "Gods be good, you've arrived," he said as Jon dismounted. "We heard rumors you were coming, but in these times rumors are easily dashed." Jon offered a small bow. "Lord Edmure, I bring men from the north under the command of Lord Eddard Stark. We are here to aid you." Edmure's gaze flicked briefly across Jon's face as though noticing his age and the bastard name, but he quickly masked any hint of doubt. "We welcome all who stand against the Lannisters. The war has grown dire these past weeks." He gestured around. "My father is ill. My sister, Caitlin, is absent, off negotiating with other lords, I believe. I hold Riverrun, but Tywin's men keep pressing. They've sacked 6 villages, including those that supply us with food. If we cannot push them back soon, we may face starvation come spring." Harry and Karstark stepped forward, jaw tight. "Lord Stark has commanded we offer every assistance." "Where's Tywin's army now?" Edmure grimaced. "He's entrenched to the east, near the ruins of a castle called Stone Mill. Ser Gregor Clegane leads raiding parties along the Red Fork. They come in swift, torch everything, then retreat. We cannot meet them in open battle without risking a trap. But with your reinforcements, perhaps we have a chance." They moved inside Riverrun's Great Hall to discuss specifics. Jon noticed how many of the Tully retainers were bandaged or limping, the aftermath of repeated clashes. Maps of the Riverlands were spread on a long oak table. Edmure pointed to Stone Mill, explaining how Tywin had set up a base of operations, forcing Edmure to remain near Riverrun lest the Lannisters encircle them. Jon studied the layout, Harrion and Theon beside him. "If we bring our full strength against Stone Mill, we risk the Lannisters fainting around us. We should send scouts around their flank. See if we can draw Tywin out into disadvantageous ground." Edmure nodded. "Agreed, but be wary. Tywin is cunning, and Gregor is brutal. They might provoke us with raids, hoping to lure us into a trap. Harrion spoke quietly. We should also watch the roads to Harrenhal, in case Tywin tries to retreat there if pressed. The hours wore on as they hashed out a plan. Jon found himself unexpectedly included in every key decision. It felt strange. He was still accustomed to being the outsider, a bastard overshadowed by Robb's rightful place. But here he was, representing Ned and the North, carrying an authority he had never thought possible. Each time Edmure or Harrion turned to him for his opinion, a sliver of doubt stung him. Was he truly qualified? Yet he steeled himself, recalling Ned's words about duty. By nightfall, they agreed to a strategy. Tully outriders and some Karstark cavalry would harass any raiding parties, while the main force prepared to move east in a feint designed to draw Tywin out. The hope was that if Tywin believed Riverrun undermanned, he might attempt a siege, thereby exposing himself to an attack from behind by Jon's main host. A risky plan, but war was never safe. They spent a tense week preparing. Jon's men settled into camps around Riverrun, fortifying positions and building supply lines. Raids continued sporadically, black plumes of smoke visible on the horizon. At night, Jon's dreams were haunted by images of Robert's sneering face, of Ned looking betrayed, of the old gods in the weirwood trees. He would wake in the dark, sweat trickling down his brow, and see Ghost's red eyes shining near the tent flap. Another day of conflict loomed. At last, the day came for them to enact their plan. Edmure feigned sending a large portion of his troops north, away from Riverrun, while the gates were left visibly undermanned. Harrion Karstark led a cavalry detachment south to patrol for raiders. Jon remained with a sizable force, hidden in a wooded ravine near the Red Fork, waiting to ambush any Lannister attempt to move on Riverrun. Theon and a few Greyjoy riders joined him, eager for a fight. Dawn broke cold and gray, the sun barely a pale disk behind thick clouds. Scouts came galloping in around midday, reporting that a column of Lannister troops, at least 2,000 strong, was advancing from the east, possibly led by Ser Gregor Clegane himself. Tywin, however, was nowhere in sight, perhaps holding back with the main host near Stone Mill. Jon's heart hammered as he listened to the report. This was their chance. If they could crush Gregor's column, they might buy Edmure the space he needed to secure the region. They waited in tense stillness among the trees, the ground damp from recent snowmelt. Jon could hear the men's breathing, the creak of leather, the occasional snort from a horse. He glanced down the line. Karstark pikemen crouched behind the brush, Mandoli archers further up the slope. Theon was a few yards away, flashing a wolfish grin. Ghost stood beside Jon's horse, silent, ears alert. At last, the sound of marching drifted toward them, metal clanking, hooves on damp soil, the low murmur of men. Through the tangled branches, Jon saw the glint of Lannister red and gold surcoats, the banners bearing the Golden Lion. At the head rode a giant of a man in dark armor, a great sword across his back, Ser Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides. Even at a distance, he was a fearsome sight. His men advanced in columns, suspecting no ambush. Jon exchanged a final glance with Harrion Karstark, who signaled the archers. Then, at Jon's nod, the first wave of arrows flew with a hissing rush. They rained down on the unsuspecting Lannister soldiers. Screams erupted, men toppling from their saddles, some pinned to the muddy earth. Gregor roared, wheeling his massive warhorse as more arrows whistled. Now came the moment. Jon raised his sword, signaling the charge. Northern pikemen burst from cover, the grass and bracken whipping around them as they ran toward the battered Lannister line. Theon's riders thundered forward from a flank, hacking and slashing at disoriented men in lion-crested helms. Ghost raced at Jon's side, a white blur among the chaos. The clamor of battle engulfed them, steel against steel, warhorses screaming, men cursing and bellowing in pain. Jon found himself face to face with a Lannister knight who swung a mace at his head. Jon jerked his reins, ducking in the saddle, then slashed down with his longsword, biting into the knight's shoulder. Blood sprayed and the man toppled. A second came at him from the side, thrusting a spear. Jon twisted, parried with a jarring clang, then spurred his horse forward, ignoring the burn in his arms. Bodies littered the ground, the snow turned to a dark slush beneath the melee. Karstark pikemen jabbed at any Lannister foot soldier who strayed too close, while Mandoli archers peppered the rear ranks with volley after volley. Theon could be heard shouting triumphantly, cutting down a banner carrier and seizing the lion standard, brandishing it as if it were a trophy. Ser Gregor's roar cut through the din. Jon caught sight of him hacking down a pikeman with chilling ease, his massive sword slicing through armor and flesh. A group of northern spearmen tried to surround him, but he whirled, batting them aside as if they were children. The man was monstrous in every sense, towering in the saddle, unstoppable. Jon realized that if Gregor broke free, he could rally his men. Already, some of the Lannisters were beginning to regroup around him. Jon urged his horse closer, trying to coordinate an attack. "Archers, focus on the big one." Jon bellowed, though the chaos swallowed his words. He saw Haryon Karstark riding in, face grim behind his helmet. Haryon lunged with his lance at Gregor's flank, but the mountain twisted with a speed that belied his size. Gregor caught the lance shaft and snapped it in two, then lashed out with a brutal swing that would have cleaved Haryon's head had he not ducked in time. Haryon's horse shrieked as Gregor's blade bit into its flank, and Haryon went tumbling into the muck. "Karstark!" Jon shouted, spurring forward. Ghost was already racing through the crush of men bearing fangs. Gregor spurred his warhorse in a savage attempt to trample Haryon, who rolled aside at the last instant. Ghost sprang, snarling, trying to tear at the warhorse's forelegs, but Gregor kicked out, striking the dire wolf hard enough to send Ghost skidding across the ground with a yelp. Rage flared in Jon. He urged his horse closer. A pair of Lannister men-at-arms blocked him, so he slashed furiously, driving them back. Theon, bloodied but grinning, thundered by, shouting, "For the Starks," as he cut down another man. Jon wheeled around, ignoring the carnage on all sides, focusing on Gregor. Haryon had regained his feet, drawing his sword, but he limped, blood trickling from a dent in his armor. Gregor sneered behind his visor, raising the gargantuan sword. Before he could bring it down, Jon galloped in, smashing shoulder first into Gregor's warhorse, trying to knock it off balance. The two horses collided with a dull thud, nearly unseating both riders. Gregor turned, seething with fury, and swung at Jon. Jon felt the wind of that blade as he ducked, hearing it whistle past. He stabbed at Gregor's midsection, but the man's armor was thick and the blow only glanced off, leaving sparks. Gregor bashed Jon's horse with his shield. The steed screamed, rearing. Jon fought to keep control, to avoid being thrown. Haryon took the chance to lunge in from behind. His sword caught Gregor's shoulder where the armor plates joined, drawing blood. Gregor growled in pain and wheeled about, backhanding Haryon so hard the Karstark spun and hit the ground. Jon seized the opportunity. Reining his panicked horse, he lifted his sword and thrust at Gregor's now exposed flank. The blade bit in, deeper this time. Gregor howled, half turning in the saddle, and slammed the hilt of his sword into Jon's chest, knocking the wind from him. Jon tumbled from his horse, crashing to the ground, the breath blasted out of his lungs. Spots danced before his eyes as he struggled for air. He rolled onto his back just in time to see Gregor tower over him, sword raised to deliver a killing blow. In that final instant, Ghost lunged in again, jaws snapping at Gregor's leg. The mountain cursed, staggering. That split second was enough for Haryon. Despite his injuries, the Karstark had managed to climb to his feet. He drove his sword upward into the gap of Gregor's armor below the ribs. It was a vicious, determined strike. Gregor let out a terrible rasping noise, swinging wildly at Haryon but missing as his strength failed. Then, with a guttural gasp, the mountain that rides toppled from his saddle, crashing to the churned mud. Jon twisted aside, narrowly avoiding the falling warhorse, and scrambled back, chest heaving. The ground spun beneath him. He heard cheers and shouts as more Lannisters reeled at the sight of Gregor's defeat. Haryon Karstark collapsed to his knees, his sword slick with blood, while Ghost snarled at the twitching form of the monstrous knight. A group of northern spearmen rushed in to finish off any who tried to drag Gregor away, but it was clear the mountain was dying. All around them, the battle was turning into a rout. Leaderless, the Lannister forces began to flee, stumbling over the dead, the wounded, each other. Some cried for mercy. Theon's riders galloped after the retreating columns, cutting them down or capturing them. On the hillside, the Manderly archers loosed volley after volley at the fleeing men, while the Karstark pikemen advanced methodically. The air stank of blood, smoke, and terror. Jon struggled to his feet, his ribs on fire. A flurry of worry coursed through him. Where was Theon? Where were his men? He spotted Theon a dozen yards away, pulling down a wounded Lannister knight from horseback. The Greyjoy hooped in savage triumph, but the warlust in his eyes made Jon uneasy. He turned instead to Haryon Karstark, who knelt by Gregor's body, panting. "You killed him," Jon said, dazed. "Gods, you actually killed him." Haryon managed a nod, his face pale. Had to protect the north. Jon leaned closer, seeing the blood-soaking Harrion's side. "We'll get you a maester," he said. "Hold on." Harrion coughed. I'm all right. Just a bruise, I think." But the bruise was leaking a worrying amount of blood. A pair of Karstark men hurried over, carefully lifting Harrion. Jon squeezed his shoulder in thanks, then turned to the spectacle of the battlefield. The victory was theirs. Gregor Clegane lay motionless, a crumpled mass of black armor amid the churned mud and broken weapons. The Lannister standard had fallen, half-trampled. Dozens of corpses marked where the first arrow volleys had struck. Many more lay scattered from the savage melee. Among them were northern men as well, for no victory comes without cost. Cries of the wounded rose to the gray sky. Ghost padded toward Jon, blood on his muzzle. Jon knelt, relief washing over him as he ruffled the direwolf's ears. "You saved me," he murmured, voice thick. He felt the sting in his chest from the blow, but he was alive. Gregor Clegane would trouble them no more. By the time the sun set, the battlefield had been secured. Edmure Tully arrived with reinforcements, exclaiming in shock when he saw the Mountain's corpse. The Tully men set about tending to the injured, collecting prisoners, gathering the dead for burial. Edmure clasped Jon's forearm, gratitude written across his face. "You've done the Riverlands a great service. That man was a monster, and you slew him." Jon winced, thinking how close he himself had come to death. "Harrion struck the killing blow," he corrected. "We all fought. It was no easy thing." Edmure nodded. "Nonetheless, it's a victory. Tywin will feel this blow keenly. Without Gregor's terror to lead his raids, the Lannister force may be less daring." Jon surveyed the devastation around them. Men carried off the wounded, some moaning piteously. Others slumped lifeless in the mud. The stench was thick in the air. Victory, yes, but so many lives ended, so many families shattered. He recalled Ned's warning about not glorying in war. This was the price of all those banners they flew. As night fell, they camped near the battlefield, too drained to move on immediately. Fires dotted the plain, where men hunched over bowls of thin stew, the adrenaline of battle fading into hollow exhaustion. Harrion Karstark was carried into a command tent, where a maester from Riverrun examined his injuries. Theon swaggered about, recounting his kills to any who would listen. Jon took a quiet seat by a low-burning fire, Ghost at his side, feeling bruised and hollow. Edmure joined him, easing onto a log. "You look troubled," the Tully lord observed gently. Jon's mouth felt dry. "I started all this," he said at last, softly, so only Edmure might hear. "I was the one who forced King Robert's hand in Winterfell, set the realm on this path. Now I see men dying in the mud, small folk burned from their homes, children left orphaned. I ask myself if I did right." Edmure was silent a moment, the firelight dancing across his bearded face. At length he sighed. "The realm was on the brink, Jon. Even if you hadn't confronted Robert, another spark might have lit this blaze. My father always said that the seeds of war are sown in the hearts of proud men. Robert was proud, the Lannisters are proud, the North too. Perhaps it was inevitable." Jon stared at the flames. "And if we are all damned for it?" Edmure's expression was somber. "Then we must strive to ensure that, if damnation comes, we at least protect the people we swore to shield. You fought for them today, Jon Snow. You drove back a force that would have sacked more villages and butchered more innocents." Jon nodded slowly, thinking of the old man in Braemore, trembling in that charred barn. Perhaps this victory would spare another village from Gregor's cruelty. That was something, at least. In the distance, men carried torches to the scene of the fighting, collecting the bodies for a mass pyre. Others dug shallow graves for those of the North who had fallen. The gloom weighed heavy. Dawn would bring new decisions, how best to press the advantage, whether to strike at Tywin's base at Stone Mill or hold ground and wait for Ned's next instructions. War, it seemed, was a never-ending series of gambles. Jon rose from the fire eventually, leaving Edmure to speak with other Tully lords. He found Harrion Karstark resting in the command tent, the maester stitching a nasty gash in his side. Harrion's face was pale, a pain set to his jaw. "We avenged my brothers," he croaked when he saw Jon. "Gregor died. They can rest easier now." Jon knelt by him, murmuring softly, "You were brave. But rest. We need you alive for what's to come." Harrion's half-smile was all the answer he managed before the maester urged silence. Outside the tent, Theon intercepted Jon, brandishing a blood-stained lion banner. "Look at this," he said with a grin too wild for Jon's comfort. "Proof that the Lannisters are not invincible." Jon pushed the banner aside. "Go help bury the dead," he said curtly. "Or find a place to rest." Theon's grin slipped. "We won, Jon. Show a bit of joy. We might push Tywin out of the Riverlands with a few more strikes like that." "Yes," Jon murmured. "We might. But inside, he felt no joy, only a grim acceptance that the wheel of war would keep turning. That night, the howling of distant wolves echoed across the plains, mingling with the groans of wounded men. Jon lay on a pallet in his tent, ghost curled at his side. Every muscle throbbed, and his mind swirled with images he could not banish. Gregor's sword raised to end his life, Haryon Karstark's quiet anguish, the battered remains of ravaged villages, Ned's solemn face when Robert died in Winterfell. In the darkness, he whispered a prayer to the old gods, for the living and the dead alike. He did not know how long this war would last, nor who might triumph in the end. Part of him wondered if the realm would ever find peace again, torn as it was by so many factions, Joffrey on the Iron Throne, Stannis forging some claim of his own, Renly gathering power in the south, the Tyrells biding their time, and the north declaring its own sovereignty under Ned's leadership. A war of 5 kings, some called it. In truth, it felt like 100 petty wars swirling around the land. But here, in the Riverlands, Jon had at least claimed a small step forward for House Stark and their allies. Dawn brought new tidings. Scouts reported that Tywin was indeed pulling back from Stone Mill, reorganizing further south. With Gregor's terror gone, the Lannister hold on the local villages began to wane. Freed from the immediate threat, Edmure Tully could send men to gather supplies, evacuate survivors, and begin fortifying the roads. It was a respite, though how long it might last was anyone's guess. Jon busied himself assisting Edmure, dispatching outriders to see if Tywin was truly retreating or simply repositioning for another strike. He also oversaw the disposition of the many prisoners taken in the battle. Some were Lannister bannermen, others mercenaries or sellswords. Interrogations revealed that Tywin's overall strategy remained aimed at wearing down the Tullus and draining their resources. Gregor's raids had been but one piece of that puzzle. In the midst of this, word reached them that Ned Stark himself was traveling south to Riverrun, escorted by a fresh contingent of men. Jon felt a surge of relief at the thought of seeing his father. He needed Ned's steady presence more than ever. He also knew that with Ned's arrival, bigger decisions loomed about how to advance the war. Would they push further into the Crownlands? Attempt to link with rebel forces in the Reach or the Stormlands, where Renly Baratheon claimed kingship? Or would they dig in to hold the Riverlands, gambling that Joffrey's regime in King's Landing would fracture under its own weaknesses? About a week after the battle that ended Gregor Clegane, Ned Stark rode beneath Riverrun's portcullis with 100 northern knights and a scattering of bannermen. Jon awaited him in the courtyard. As Ned dismounted, Jon could see the fatigue etched into the lines of his face. Yet a spark of relief glinted in Ned's gray eyes when he saw Jon standing, alive and unbroken. Jon bowed his head in respect, but Ned pulled him into a swift embrace, the tension of fatherly worry draining from his face. "I heard what happened here," Ned said quietly once they were apart. "You fought bravely." Jon felt a flicker of warmth at his father's praise. "Haryon Karstark is the true hero. He delivered the killing blow on Gregor." Ned nodded, glancing around the courtyard where men bustled with crates of arrows, barrels of provisions, repairs to wagons. "Yet you led them. You protected the Riverlands from further atrocity, at least for a time. I'm proud of you, Jon." The words struck Jon to the core, stirring a swirl of gratitude and guilt. He could only incline his head. "Thank you, father." They retreated into Riverrun's great hall for a war council with Edmure, Haryon, now on his feet but still bandaged, the Manderley commander, and other captains. Ned listened intently to Edmure's account of the last weeks, then spread out his own reports. Crown forces led by Joffrey's generals had stayed near the capital, while Tywin's fora YS in the Riverlands had been the main threat. Meanwhile, Renly Baratheon had declared himself king in the south, seeking Tyrell backing, while Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone also claimed the throne. "The realm is divided among too many claims," Ned concluded. "We need to decide if the North and the Riverlands shall stand alone or seek alliances." Edmure asked, "What of my sister, Lady Catelyn? Have you had any word?" Ned sighed. "She is safe, I believe, negotiating with certain lords in the Vale. Lisa remains uncertain, but there's hope the Knights of the Vale might join us. As for the Tyrells, we've received no direct missives. They seem aligned with Renly, at least for now." Silence fell, each man grasping the complexity of the board. Then Haryon said, "We can't fight all of them at once. Perhaps it's enough to hold the North and the Riverlands. If Tywin wants a full confrontation, let him come. We'll beat him again." Ned's gaze flicked to Jon. "Jon, you've seen how war truly is. The cost is too high to fight a war of attrition. If there's a way to gain advantage or broker a strong alliance." Jon thought of what it would mean. More marriages, more concessions, more vow-making. He studied the map. If we remain on the defensive, we risk giving the initiative back to Tywin. but if we march on him aggressively, we might overextend. The group weighed options, debating late into the evening. Ultimately, Ned and Edmure decided that they should press forward enough to keep Tywin on the back foot, but not so far as to abandon their lines of supply. Roving patrols would push into Lannister-held territory, freeing any villages under oppression. Meanwhile, Ned would send envoys to the Vale, urging Lisa Arryn to commit knights to the war. When the meeting ended, Ned pulled Jon aside. "Walk with me." They strolled along Riverlands' outer rampart, the waters of the Red Fork shining under a moonlit sky. Torches flickered on the walls, revealing the strain in Ned's expression. Below, in the courtyard, men huddled around fires, sharing quiet conversation or snatches of laughter. A hush fell over the night. Ned turned to Jon. "I must praise you again. You've done well holding the alliance here, but I see the toll it's taking." Jon stared at the rushing waters outside the castle walls, feeling the swirl of conflicting emotions. "It's war," he said simply. "We can't change that. But every day I think of Winterfell, the quiet nights, the walls I once believed so unassailable. It's never going to be the same, is it?" Ned's face tightened. "No. After so much bloodshed, nothing is ever quite the same. But if we can win a peace, an enduring peace, at least it won't all be for nothing." Jon exhaled, the cold air stinging his lungs. "I fear it might be too high a cost. Even if we free the north, keep the Riverlands safe, what about the rest of the realm? Do we let them tear each other apart?" Ned's jaw clenched. "We cannot save everyone. But we will do what we can to protect our lands and our people. Perhaps, if the gods are merciful, alliances can be forged with Renly or with Stannis that might restore some semblance of order. The Lannisters, well, Tywin will not yield easily. Nor will Joffrey." Jon nodded. The vision of King Joffrey, caged in Winterfell, rose in his mind, the boy's sharp, petulant face. He wondered if Joffrey even grieved Robert's death. Perhaps not. That family reeked of ambition and cruelty more than love. They walked a bit further. Ned said quietly, "We must decide how best to use the impetus you created, Jon. The North's stand for independence has emboldened others. The Riverlands join us, the Vale might join us. If the Tyrells decide to break from the Iron Throne in favor of Renly, that leaves King's Landing isolated. We might see a swift collapse of Joffrey's rule." "That would be justice," Jon said, voice hard. "He wasn't even a true king to begin with, not while Robert was captive." Ned gave a weary shrug. "Justice is slow in these lands. But we can hope. For now, we must remain steadfast. The watchers on the walls must not falter." Jon nodded, remembering the old vow of the Night's Watch he had once considered taking, the watchers on the walls, protecting the realm. Now, ironically, he served as a watchman for the North in an entirely different war. He thought of the real wall in the far north, the darkness beyond it, and wondered if the men of the Night's Watch had enough rangers to guard against wildlings or other threats. So much attention had turned southward to the Clash of Kings that the true North might have been forgotten. In the days that followed, Ned took direct command of the joint Stark-Tully forces in the area, organizing raids on Tywin's supply lines. Jon rode at his father's side, learning more about the subtleties of warfare. They took small, strategic steps, burning Lannister storehouses, scattering foraging parties, freeing captive smallfolk. Step by step, Tywin's hold on the eastern Riverlands weakened. Some local lords who had been coerced by the Lannisters turned back to the Tully cause once they saw the tide shifting. Others remained loyal to Tywin either out of fear or gold. There were minor skirmishes nearly every other day. Jon realized that war was often 1,000 small engagements rather than a single grand battle. Through it all, Ned carried himself with a quiet determination. He avoided unnecessary cruelty, refusing to torch villages that had no direct Lannister occupation, forbidding the wholesale execution of prisoners, actions that Theon sometimes scoffed at, though he did not dare openly defy Ned's orders. Harry Karstark, recovered enough to ride, fought with a single-minded ferocity that concerned Jon. The man had lost 2 brothers, killed Gregor Clegane with his own hand, and now seemed bent on punishing anyone wearing lion sigils. More than once, Jon intervened to stop Harrion from cutting down a prisoner in anger. A darkness lingered in Harrion's eyes. Amid these smaller actions, word arrived from other corners of the realm. Stannis had allegedly crowned himself on Dragonstone, calling himself the rightful heir to Robert. Renly had marched from Highgarden with the backing of House Tyrell, proclaiming a grand new monarchy. Joffrey reigned in King's Landing, with Tywin acting as his general, though King's Landing itself was rumored to be rife with unrest. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, Queen Cersei and Jaime Lannister remained prisoners, their freedom contingent on the crown recognizing the North's sovereignty. All these swirling events underscored that the War of Five Kings was well and truly begun. Some nights, Jon overheard men calling Ned the King in the North, the White Wolf. Ned never claimed that title openly, preferring Lord of Winterfell. But the name was out there. The once unthinkable notion of a free North stood closer to reality than ever, provided they could hold their ground. Winter pressed on and the cold intensified. Snowfall became more frequent, dusting the burnt fields, clinging to the roofs of half-collapsed barns. Provisions ran low, but the Tully grain stores from safer regions managed to reach them. Jon noted how young some of the soldiers were, boys of 14 or 15, trembling in the cold, eyes wide from the horrors they witnessed. He could not help but see something of himself in them, remembering the nights he'd lain awake in Winterfell, longing to prove his worth. Now, he was no longer the awkward boy overshadowed by his trueborn siblings, but a commander with men's lives in his hands. It weighed on him daily. One dawn, after a successful raid on a Lannister outpost, Ned called Jon to ride with him alone along the ridgeline overlooking a valley. The valley below was a patchwork of farmland turned to black stubble in the snow, a small river winding through it. The hush of morning lay over the land, broken only by the distant caw of crows. Ned reined in his horse, letting Jon draw up beside him. "We've bloodied Tywin's nose," Ned said, gesturing to the valley below. "He's lost Gregor, lost men and resources, but he isn't finished, not by half. If cornered, a lion can become more dangerous, not less." Jon inhaled the cold air. "What would you have us do?" Ned's gaze was steady. "I want you to return to Winterfell, check on your siblings, ensure the defenses hold, and see that our guests remain secure. Winterfell is the heart of the North's cause. We can't risk losing it." Jon was surprised. Part of him wanted to remain by his father's side, but he also yearned to see Winterfell again, to ensure that the fortress was safe and that Arya, Sansa, Bran, and Rickon were well. "Will you be all right here?" A ghost of a smile crossed Ned's lips. "Edmure and I can manage. Roose Bolton is bringing men west soon, which will strengthen us further. If Tywin tries another push, we'll hold. But I need someone I trust to watch over Winterfell, to keep the North's cause alive there." Jon nodded, understanding. "I'll go." He wondered how Theon would take the news. He had grown fond of the battles. But Ned's order was clear, and Jon would obey. If war had taught him anything, it was that leadership and loyalty must run deeper than thirst for glory. They rode back to camp in silence. The next morning, Jon assembled a small escort to accompany him north. Some Karstark riders, a handful of Manderly men, and a few personal guards from Winterfell. Harrion would remain with Ned, continuing to fight. Theon, to Jon's mild surprise, chose to stay in the Riverlands. "I've not finished having my fun," Theon quipped, though Jon suspected he also still hoped to earn some measure of renown separate from Ned Stark's shadow. Before Jon departed, Ned clasped his forearm one last time. "Remember who you are, Jon," he said quietly. "You wear the Stark name in your heart, if not in law. Winterfell is in your care. Protect our family." Jon met his father's gaze. "I will, father." And so, in the pale light of another snowy dawn, Jon Snow turned northward once more, leading his small retinue away from the war-torn Riverlands. Smoke still rose from distant farmsteads, though the dawn sky cast a faint pink glow on the snowy plains. Each clop of the horses' hooves echoed in Jon's mind, a steady drumbeat reminding him that while one chapter of this war had concluded for him, another awaited at Winterfell. The North's defiance had begun there, sparked by his own act. Now the realm lay in shards, scattered among kings and pretenders. He wondered if, years from now, anyone would recall how a bastard of the North had challenged a king and changed the course of history, or if the memory of it would be lost in the shuffle of grander legends. Renly, Stannis, Joffrey, Daenerys Targaryen across the sea, rumored to be stirring with dragons. So many forces moved in Westeros and beyond, 100 shifting powers swirling around. Jon felt small in the face of it, yet the North was his anchor. If he could keep Winterfell secure, if he could ensure the safety of Ned's family, then perhaps the war would not devour them all. His party made slow progress over battered roads and wintry terrain. He caught glimpses of the devastation inflicted even on the fringes of the Riverlands. Small folk who had lost everything shuffled aimlessly along the road, emaciated faces peering in fear at any armed men. Jon distributed what little extra food they carried, knowing it was inadequate. A pang of guilt struck him whenever he saw children among the refugees, their eyes hollow with hunger. He pushed on, spurred by a cold determination. The sooner he reached Winterfell, the sooner he could fortify the seat of the North, perhaps arrange more aid for these stricken people. As they approached the twins once more, Jon was prepared for the usual Frey extortion. Sure enough, a representative came forth demanding a toll, though not as exorbitant as before. Jon paid it with a tight-lipped acceptance. House Frey was too slippery to antagonize at present. He merely glared at the Freymen, making it clear he had no patience for their scheming. Then they crossed the long bridge, pressed on into the neck, the landscape turning misty and swampy, the days growing colder and gloomier. Somewhere in those marshes, he remembered, House Reed was pledged to the Starks. He wondered if he might encounter them, but aside from a glimpse of a few hidden watchers among the reeds, faces painted in greenish swamp colors, no one approached. The watchers vanished as quickly as they appeared, ghosts in the mist. Jon felt an odd comfort at their presence. At least House Reed still guarded the ways of the neck for the north. Days stretched into weeks of travel. Winter's grip tightened. The nights were long, the wind fierce. Jon's men endured, though some fell ill, and they had to slow their pace. Finally, they reached the outskirts of Winterfell's domain. Snow drifted heavily, piling against the trunks of ancient oaks. By the time the gray walls of Winterfell rose into sight, relief flooded Jon. He paused on a small rise, gazing upon the castle's familiar silhouette. Smoke curled from chimneys and lights gleamed in the windows. It looked peaceful from a distance, as though untouched by the war that had roared through the rest of the realm. But Jon knew that within those walls were captives, intrigues, and tension enough to rival any battlefield. They approached the main gate. The guards recognized him immediately, ushering him inside. Jon felt the warmth of the courtyard's natural hot springs beneath the ground. The sense of home pressed upon him, but also the memory of the night he had locked King Robert in these halls. So much had changed since then. Within minutes, servants were hurrying to inform Lady Catelyn of Jon's arrival, but the news came back that Lady Catelyn was still absent. She had left weeks ago on some errand, presumably to the Vale. Instead, Ser Rodrik Castle emerged, his white whiskers twitching in relief at the sight of Jon. "Lord Snow, or should I say, welcome back," he said, clasping Jon's arm. "We'd begun to worry. Did you see Lord Stark in the Riverlands?" Jon dismounted, nodding. "He's well. He sends word that the war remains in flux, but we've struck a few blows against Tywin. He wants me to ensure Winterfell is secure." Ser Roderick's gaze flicked to the men behind Jon, battered from travel. "We've held the fort well enough. The Queen and her family remain confined, though tensions run high. And we've had other issues." Jon stiffened. "What issues?" Ser Roderick hesitated, then said quietly, "Lord Walder's men passed through not long ago, and there was a confrontation with some of our garrison. A near brawl in the courtyard. The Freys wanted to see the Queen, claimed to have some authority from King Joffrey. We refused, of course, but it stirred ill will. Also, we've had a growing problem with supply trains from the outlying villages. Some men speak of bandits, others suspect infiltration by Crown sympathizers." He paused. "Your siblings have also grown restless." Jon rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. "I see. Where are Arya and Sansa?" "Up in the Solar, I believe," Ser Roderick said. "And your brothers, well, the younger ones are with old Nan, last I heard. They will be thrilled to see you." Jon felt a stirring of warmth at that, longing to check on them. But first, he had other matters to attend to. He turned to the men who had ridden with him. "Stable the horses, see that the supplies are stored. You've all earned rest. I'll speak with you again soon." After delegating tasks, Jon made for the keep's interior, Ghost following in his footsteps. The corridors looked much the same, though fewer servants bustled about. The hush in the halls reminded him of the night before Robert's arrival, so long ago. He climbed the familiar stair to the upper levels and found the solar door ajar. There, a bright fire crackled, warding off the chill. Inside, Sansa sat near a loom, her hair meticulously brushed, though her face was pale. Arya perched by the window, legs dangling over the ledge, a faraway look in her eyes. Both turned at once when Jon appeared. Sansa let out a small gasp, her eyes flooding with relief. Arya's face lit up in a grin. "Jon," Arya said, bounding off the ledge and crossing the room. She nearly collided with him in a fierce hug, so unlike her usual guarded self. "You're back." Jon wrapped an arm around her shoulders, stunned by how tall she'd grown in these weeks. "I'm back, little sister," he said, warmth breaking through his exhaustion. Sansa approached more hesitantly, her eyes shining. Jon opened an arm to her as well, and she hugged him. For a moment, the war felt distant. "You're all right," Sansa murmured, tears threatening to spill. "We heard rumors of a great battle, that you faced some monster knight." Jon let out a shaky breath. "Ser Gregor Clegane. He's dead. Harry and Karstark killed him, but we all nearly died in the process." Arya pulled back, excitement in her eyes. "You killed the Mountain?" "He was said to be unstoppable." Jon gently corrected her. "Harry killed him, truly, but yes, we brought him down." Sansa wiped her eyes, regaining her composure. It's wonderful that you've returned safe. Winterfell feels uneasy without father, without mother. And with the Queen here," she glanced to Arya, who scowled. Jon's expression hardened. "How has the Queen behaved?" Arya made a face. "She preens in her chambers, that's all. She and Jaime scheme, I'm sure of it. The guards keep them locked away, but sometimes I see them in the corridor with guards all around, and Cersei just looks at everyone as if we're insects." Sansa nodded timidly. "It's frightening, Jon. Joffrey is far away in King's Landing, but the way she talks sometimes. I'm afraid she'll find some way to make father pay." Jon recalled the rumors from the war councils that Tywin might send a force to liberate Cersei and Jaime, or that Joffrey might demand a hostage exchange. "They're helpless for now," he said softly, hoping to reassure his sisters. "But we must remain vigilant. Father sent me here to make sure Winterfell stands firm." Arya's eyes lit with determination. "I'll help, Jon. I can spar, I can keep watch, Aya." Jon rested a hand on her shoulder. "I know you're fierce, little wolf, but let Ser Roderick handle the watch. We need you safe. The realm is in chaos. None of us can say what tomorrow brings." Sansa cast her gaze downward. "I just want the war to end. I want everything to go back to the way it was, when father would sit in the Great Hall and we'd have feasts, and the worst fear was a scolding from Septim Ordain." Jon felt a pang. "Those days might be gone for now, Sansa. But we'll do our best to restore peace. Father is fighting for that for us." They spoke a while longer, the conversation shifting between earnest relief at Jon's return and anxious queries about the war. At length, Jon took his leave, promising to dine with them later. He then made his way through the keep, checking on arrangements, greeting the guards. Ghost followed at his heels, drawing curious looks from some who hadn't seen the dire wolf in weeks. Soon, Jon would have to face Queens Cersei and Jaime to confirm their captivity remained secure. He would have to deal with the Freys who lurked about, the bandit troubles in the outskirts, the supply issues. But as he walked the halls of Winterfell, the place he had sparked this entire rebellion, he felt a weary sense of resolution. War had made him older, sharper, perhaps colder. Yet he was still Jon Snow, the bastard boy who once stared enviously at Robb's place in the family. Now the weight of the North pressed upon him in ways he had never imagined. In the quiet hush of a corridor leading to the Godwood, he paused, resting a hand on Ghost's head. "We're home," he whispered. The direwolf blinked those red eyes, as if to say it was a home they would both defend until their final breath. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches of the weirwood trees in the Godwood. Winter was here, war was upon them, and the future was uncertain. But for this moment, in these old halls, Jon felt the faint stir of hope. The North still stood. The dream of independence had not died. And he would see it through, come what may.